invite you. So this will be the first seminar called Prepping Your Boat. In October, September, October, we will have another seminar called Prepping Your Boat, but it is an entirely different seminar. And that is usually run by Don Snellgrove here, who is our safety guy. And he will tell you how to pass the safety inspection. We adhere to a semblance of the ISAF Cat 1 offshore sailing equipment rules. The list is extensive. And those are the kind of things that over the winter, before you do the race, you're going to want to pay attention to. But so far for this year, for this time in the prep process, it's pretty easy, and these are more of the broad strokes. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Kate. Oh, two other housekeeping items. One, at some point between the speakers, we'll do the raffle for a bunch of Mustang swag. I've been advised that if you are parked here in the parking lot, you're good until noon, even if you are not a member, which is amazing, because normally they just tow you if you're not a member. But and then after our presentation today, you're all invited upstairs for lunch or drinks or whatever at the bar. But if you're not a member here at EYC, welcome. And with that, I will give you Kristen Berry.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you much. Yeah. Mike, thanks for the introduction. Up here on the screen, I threw this video in here this morning. This is us crossing the Atlantic in January of 2022 on an ML 50, wing on wing for more than 2,000 miles. So sometimes this owner, when we were putting this boat together, asked if I thought we'd need a spinnaker. I said, nah. Whoops. Fact of the matter is that this boat sails extremely well wing on wing. And I want to kind of put a pin in that because I think everybody ought to be thinking about their pain points in their sales selection. If you're thinking about a race offshore and specifically to Bermuda, because it kind of requires a certain set of sales. All right, so backing up here for a minute. Who am I? My name's Kristen Berry. Just about everybody in town calls me KB. You are all welcome to call me KB as well, or Kristen, just don't call me late for dinner. I have been working as a full-time sailing instructor, coach, program manager here in the DC area since the late 90s, full-time sailing since 2006. And most recently, I crossed the Atlantic in 2022. And in that same year, my wife reminded me this morning that I did 5 trips to Bermuda. So quite a few miles between here and Bermuda. I was the director at J-World for a number of years. I work with the U.S. Naval Academy in their basic sail training program. And I also work at Ullman Sales here in Annapolis. So a little bit of everything. And I have been sailing a lot this winter and spring. In fact, I've only got 9 days not on the water in 2023. So I'm well on my way to my Century Club ticket, and I'm a little tired. But when I'm not sailing, what I want to do is talk about sailing, and that's why I'm excited to be here today. We don't have a ton of time for this topic. In fact, I would suggest that to be fully comprehensive, we'd want to spend 2 or 3 hours individually talking about your sales, your sail inventory, and your plans for sailing. But I wanted to give you kind of a high-level view of, one, how to evaluate what you have and how to think about what you might want or need. And then I want to make sure that I'm leaving enough time at the end for us to have a Q&A and discussion. To that end, if we don't get to your question, or I don't answer what or you think of something down the road, whatever the case may be, I have left business cards out on the registration table. It's got my cell phone number on there. It's never too early, never too late, never too weekend. Call anytime. If I don't want to answer, I won't. But drop me an email or shoot me a text, give me a call if you have questions about your sales. And in fact, we've got loft space right here in Annapolis, right in Eastport. So if you ever need a place to come stretch your sales out and take a look at them, talk to an expert, that's what we're here to do. All right. Going to jump right into it. If you're going to evaluate your sales, you want to lay them out and you want to systematically go through the different components of each of the sales. Now, I apologize, the print is probably a little small here, but we want to start by working down the luff of the sale. All right, this is an area that is extremely high load, carries a lot of the energy in the sail, and also sees a lot of wear and tear. Whether your mainsail or headsail are connected by a bolt rope, by slides, by slugs, by Antal rings, by a zipper, there's a million connection ways to connect the sail to your boat, but that is one of the first places that you need to check. Almost to the day, a year ago, I was sailing with a client of mine who's got I think it's an O-Day 24, just a little day sailor. We're on the Magathie River. It was one of those spring days where it had been super warm and everybody was anxious to go out and go sailing. But that also meant it was super windy. So we get there, kind of go through the boat, find the wind channels, you know, figure out the batteries are dead, get the boat going. Off the dock we go, right? And we go out and we put up the mainsail, and it's an old, tired main. You can tell right away, both from the sound and the look of it. It is connected along its foot by 6 of those slides right there, and then along its luff by an indeterminate number of plastic slides. We put the sail up, get the halyard tension set just right, bear off onto a close reach, bear off onto a beam reach, a big puff comes, 3, 2, 1, puff hits, and the sail left the boat. It literally just left the, I've never seen anything like it. All of the plastic had deteriorated, been sun rotted so badly that as soon as the sail loaded up, it just went poof. It's hanging on by the tack pin, the outhaul, and the halyard, and the sail is just otherwise gone. We muscle it down, come back in. That's sailing for the day. But a quick inspection probably would have saved us a little bit of time on that. The webbing that connects your slides to the grommets or is sewn into the bolt rope is another area where there's oftentimes a lot of wear and tear. And as it gets dirty and grimy, sometimes it's a little hard to see that. This is an area where you want to think like a pilot, not like a sailor. What I mean by that is that as sailors, we kind of pride ourselves on the baling twine and bubble gum methodology of keeping the boat going and, you know, the rugged individualism. A pilot goes out, and if it looks weird, they replace it. Right? And for good reason. The consequence is a little different for them. But these are this is kind of the attitude you want to have when you go about checking your sails. Think like a pilot, not like a sailor. You also want to check these metal fittings, or any metal fittings in a saltwater environment tend to corrode. That corrosion is not always easy to see. You want to get in there, you want to work, you want to find any weakness you can find. This stuff is not it's not that expensive to replace. I mean, a slide might cost $12 or something like that to replace, but it's a big deal if that happens to you while you're sailing offshore and on your way to Bermuda, or heck, if you're just trying to sail to Solomon's for the weekend and the mainsail gives you a problem. You'll want to check along the leading edge of your mainsail, in particular, the bolt rope, the rope that is in the leading edge of that sail, needs to be sewn into the sail. And as we hoist, especially if you've got a sail setup that doesn't employ slides or slugs, however you want to refer to it, if you're using the bolt rope as the connection point from the mainsail to the mast, it takes a lot of wear and tear. If the feeder is not well aligned and properly maintained, you'll get micro tears down along the bolt rope. And now, as the sail loads up, the bolt rope stays in place, but the sail starts to pull away. So you want to look for those early because they're patchable. You can fix these things. You don't have to get a new sail if you catch it early. If the bolt rope rips away from the luff tape, now we've got a really big problem. Okay. So definitely inspect that. With the head sails, you're going to want to, especially if you've got a luff feeder system, let's say you've got a tough luff system, or a furling head sail that uses an aluminum foil, an extrusion that goes up the head stay. Pay special attention to how the jib is loading into that extrusion. So especially if you sail on a boat that races where you're doing head sail changes with some regularity, the top of your sail tends to wear quite a bit. It's easy to fix with a hot knife. You can kind of go back in there and shape it back into place so that that doesn't spread and become a problem. Okay. So definitely want to check that. Also, where the sail itself exits the bottom of the luff groove on a furling head sail. If you haven't properly hoisted your sail and then you sheet on the sail, you can create a pinch point there that will create kind of this funky diamond wrinkle that comes off of the bottom of the furler. And when you see that, you're putting a ton of strain on the sail at that point. And a lot of people will get a tear there. That tear can then migrate across one of the bottom seams and become a real problem, especially if water loads the sail rather than air. And if you're racing to Bermuda, you should be thinking about that sort of thing. As you're crashing along, this is no Chesapeake Bay slog. This is an open ocean sail where you can put a ton of green water across the deck. Water is much denser than air. And now the loads go way up, and that's a great way to break a sail. How do I know that? Well, I've done it like 12 times. I've broken a sail like that too many times to not mention it. So anyway, check your slides, your slugs, your bolt rope, your luff tape. Really look at it inch by inch. And this is a place where if you've got questions, some blue painter's tape can come in really handy. Mark the area of question, write what you think it is there, and then bring the sail into your sailmaker, or if for whatever reason you don't have a sailmaker, bring it into us. Or if your sailmaker doesn't have time, bring it to us anyway. We're happy to look at any sail and help you both identify how serious the problem is, but also how you might go about fixing it. So once you've checked your luff, we want to look at the corners, the reefs, and the reinforcement points. The rings on spinnakers, on reef kringles, clew outhauls, the floppy ears on your reefing system, they should be intact, corrosion-free, and not oblong. They should still be round. They are incredibly highly loaded when you are setting the sail properly, and therefore they can get deformed. And they're easy to fix if you catch it early. It can be catastrophic if the head ring on your spinnaker that you need for the next 100 miles blows up. That is a really hard one to fix offshore. But we could fix it here in the loft for $80 before you left if we saw that there was something wrong with it. You want to check all of the stitching. Most of this stitching up here is either hand done or done with a big heavy machine that can throw thread through multiple layers of stiff cloth, and it carries a ton of load. The corners are where so much of the energy is focused in a sail. And so you really want to get in there and look at each and every stitch. If you find one that's starting to pull or isn't locked, you've got some straggly tails. Those are things you want to get after. And again, generally they can be cleaned up with a lighter. You can get in there and just tidy that stuff up. But if you're starting to lose stitching, you really want to make sure that, we're taking a look at that and maybe it's time to reinforce it. The headboard on your mainsail. I'll tell you a funny story about I'm guessing it was the 1999 Chicago to Mackinac race. In 1998, we had set a Chicago to Mackinac race record, and we're going back. 1999 looked like the year we could break that record again. So southwesterly breeze blowing 25 to 30 at the start was supposed to just shift to the west, which is exactly what you want in a Mac race. It was going to be like epic no matter what. And I'm on a Santa Cruz 70, which is a pretty big boat with a big rig. And we come off the start line and we're on starboard jibe, kite up. We go into our first jibe onto port, and the mainsail comes crashing down onto the deck. And we look up, and the headboard is still up there, but the sail is down here. And basically, we had Harry Lewis from North Sails, amazing sailmaker, amazing Mac racer, just hadn't seen that the headboard on this sail was going. And more or less, the headboard had bulged, separated, and allowed the cloth to slip out. It's basically two pieces of aluminum or high modulus plastic that's screwed together or clamped together. Well, anyway, so we're all sitting there going, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? You know, one kid goes up the rig to go recover the headboard. By the time he got down on the deck, our cook, yes, we had a cook. He was a good jib trimmer too. But our cook came up and said, I got it. And he was holding up the cutting board. And he took this tool that was new to us called a rotozip. Have a rotozip, they're awesome. He took the rotozip and cut the cutting board in half. And lo and behold, we had almost a perfect headboard. Screwed it together with some drywall screws and went on to sail the race. Did not break a record, but we had a great race. The point of that is twofold. One, make sure you're checking the headboard on your mainsail. It is something that goes underappreciated and overlooked all the time. Get in there, make sure it's not delaminating or separating. Make sure it's tight and well fitted. Make sure that after years of use, your main halyard shackle hasn't worn half of the headboard away. I've seen that so many times. Make sure that, you know, your friend who had too many pops didn't connect the halyard to the aft hole and now has put a big kink and deformation in the headboard. Make sure that it's all in one piece there. It's super important to check all that stuff. There was a second point I wanted to make about that. Now I've lost it. Oh, I know what it is. As you go through your sails, as you look at each of these areas and you notice, oh, there's a little bit of wear here. Not a problem yet, but I'm noticing there's wear. You need to go examine what's causing that wear. Wear and tear is normal, but if it is not consistent across the entire sail, meaning all of the bolt rope isn't worn, it's only worn in this one spot, that suggests you've got an issue somewhere that should be addressed and looked at. So this becomes the sails tell a story, and then you should follow the leads of that story to their conclusions, because it will help you address issues that you may not even be thinking about. They're really important. I'll tell you, on mainsails and jibs in particular, if you look at where the sail is chafing, it will tell you a lot. On that video I showed at the opening slide, we had sailed from France to the Canary Islands to get ready to sail from the Canary Islands to St. Lucia for our transatlantic. And on the sail from Spain to the Canary Islands, we went from Cascais to, I guess we're in Portugal, from Cascais to the Canary Islands. I noticed that there was a tiny, like a dime-sized wear spot on the mainsail that didn't have any chafe patching on it at all. And it's where, when we were wing on wing, the mainsail would fetch up against the aft swept spreaders. Now they're very nicely finished, perfectly round, no sharp edges, but you do this enough for long enough, and you're going to get a little wear patch there. So the clients were not particularly interested in me putting patch material on the mainsails, even if it was chafe patching material, because they liked the aesthetic of the sail as it was. So instead, what I did was I foamed the rig. I went up the mast, and I took pool noodles, slit them down the middle, and put them over the spreaders and over the shrouds at the spreader ends. And that gave us all the patch material that we needed for the crossing. No issues at all. So, but it was that little dime-sized scratch, and really that's all it was. It wasn't really a wear. It was just, you could see that there had been contact there that made me think, okay, I need to go chase this down and figure out how to fix it. My solution wasn't palatable to the owner, so figured out a different solution. Cool. Okay. Batten pockets and battens. I bet you could almost build a bridge between here and Bermuda with the number of battens that have been ejected out of sails. You know what I'm talking about. If you've been to Bermuda before, you think you're out of the Gulf Stream, but you're not yet really out of the Gulf Stream. And then you see this little flicker on the horizon. It's about 6 p.m. You're thinking, oh, I can't wait for that lasagna to come up on deck. Should I reef? No, that storm's way down there. It's going the other way. We're already out of the Gulf Stream. There's nothing to worry about. And then next thing you know, the black cloud starts to kind of creep over the top. And the lasagna gets put on hold as the 30-knot breeze line greets you, and you rag the living bejesus out of your mainsail. Battens number 2 and 3 eject out of the mainsail, land in the water. Guess what? They don't float, right? They go straight to the bottom. Yeah, right. You're in 11,000 feet of water, and you have just skewered a swordfish with your number 2 batten. Well, the reason that happened was you didn't properly set your battens up. You didn't inspect your batten pockets. Maybe you didn't modify your mainsail to be offshore ready. If you have a Velcro closure at the end of your batten pocket, or even just a simple, what we would describe as a flip-flop, just a patch that comes over that Velcro shut, I would argue that's not enough for offshore use. You want to have the ability to lace in and set the tension on your batten, and you need to have some redundancy in what keeps the batten pocket in. Now, a lot of us spend time focusing on the outboard end of our batten pockets, but depending on how your sail was constructed, oftentimes the inboard end of your batten pocket is the weak portion of the sail, especially if you're using a sail that is designed to sail coastal or in the Chesapeake Bay. Sometimes the inboard end is not as heavy duty as it needs to be, and you'll shoot a batten out the inside. Modern sailboats, I have a J111. We don't have overlapping head sails. Almost all of our head sails have battens in them. And so jib battens suffer from this a lot, particularly if you have vertical jib battens, meaning that your sail can furl. If you're using an up-down jib that has horizontal battens, usually the batten pockets are constructed and they take a lot of load as you luff the head sail. So they're usually well constructed, but something to be on the lookout for. If you have laminate sails, the inboard and not have full length battens, the inboard batten end is often finished with this circular patch. So basically we build a pocket and then we build some patching material over the top of that, and it's finished with this circular patch. Those always tend to have a corner that's lifting up, delaminating and pulling away. That's an early indicator that the batten tension is starting to radiate through the rest of the sail, and you've got a failure to be on the lookout for. So really want to look at how your battens are loaded and finished. If you are converting from an inshore sailing boat to an offshore sailing boat, meaning you're taking your J42 and you're finally leaving the bay and you're going to race to Bermuda, let's say, you may need to make some upgrades to the sail for your battens to carry an offshore load. You also probably have non-tapered battens. And I sort of believe that there's 3 ways to go to Bermuda. You can sail to Bermuda, you can race to Bermuda, and you can go to Bermuda to win. Depending on where you fall on that spectrum, you may want to consider improving the technology in your battens. Not all battens are created equal. You can have rod-like fiberglass stakes that are in your sail. They function as a batten. They do a fine job, particularly for long, full-length battens. But as you get racier and racier, you're going to want to improve the material that's in your batten and consider tapering your battens to improve sail shape. So inspecting, checking, and upgrading your batten pockets, both inboard and outboard, and then inspecting, checking, and upgrading your battens is a serious consideration for anybody who's looking to sail to Bermuda. The battens are really important. It's no fun to sail on a mainsail that has lost a batten. And if you do it with a head sail, if you have battened head sails, you will not have a leech left when you get to Bermuda if you're sailing that way. The battens are generally made of fiberglass, and while they are relatively well protected from UV, you do want to pull each batten out. If it isn't labeled, you want to label it, and then you want to inspect it for cracks, fissures, or any weakness. Because again, especially if you've got a full-length batten, that's a real hard spare to carry. And if you've got a broken batten that's hinging the mainsail, that's going to be a real problem on your way offshore. Sailcloth seams and cords. I think most people think that that's where sails fail, is in the cloth. But quite frankly, most of the sailcloths that we use are remarkably durable. By the way, this presentation will be available for everybody as a PDF immediately following this presentation. So I see you taking a picture of it. Please feel free to do so, but you'll get the full res version here at the conclusion of this. I'll give it to Mike and he can distribute it. So this is really fun. Find a tennis court, a pickleball court, come to the sail loft, whatever the case may be, get your sail fully unrolled and start inspecting the cloth, and then start inspecting each of the seams. And we're looking for the same stuff. What are the things that the two greatest threats to sails? What kills sails fastest? Two things. Any ideas? Sun. UV. Yeah. UV is horrible for sails. And if your sail was built more than 5 years ago, it is likely that that sail was built without the benefit of thread that is UV stable. So you may have great cloth. You may have a sail that is just fine, but if it's been exposed to UV, your threads may be beginning to fail. And you'll see that especially in a cross-cut style sail where each of the overlapping seams will start to kind of have a little bit of wiggle room in them. That's the degrading of that thread, which is easy to fix. Doesn't cost that much money. You don't have to replace that sail. You just need to upgrade the thread to something that is UV stable. All right, what's the second thing that really beats up sail cloth? Yeah, chafing, folding, flaking, bad furling. These things are really hard on your sails. So if you've got a lazy jack system and every time the mainsail lowers, it falls in the same folds, looks really awesome, right? Especially for the OCDs in the world. Yes, it's exactly the same every time. But that means that you're putting the same fold on the same fiber path every single time. This is a much bigger deal for laminate sails than it is for Dacron sails. But repeated flaking and folding is really, really hard on the cloth itself. All right. And so I sail on a lot of racing boats. We tend to roll our sails versus flake our sails whenever possible. And we are super careful on boats that furl, head sails and mainsails for that matter. We are super careful about the furls. So for instance, I spend 110 days a year in a J70. And set of sails for J70 is about $9,000. And for the high level programs, we are replacing the full set every 100 hours. Okay. Give you a little sense how stupid that is, right? So great if you're a sailmaker, but anyway, but because of that, we're super careful about how we deal with our sails. So for instance, between the windward mark and offset mark, we're sailing with our mainsail and our jib in an eased position. We are super careful about on the approach to the windward mark, somebody releases the mainsail Cunningham so that it'll fully release before we get to the weather mark, because as soon as you start reaching, there's not enough load in the main to get the Cunningham to fully release. And we need that to happen so we're not deforming the sail on that short spreader leg. Then as we come around the offset mark and we start sailing downwind, we set the spinnaker. And then we add a little bit of jib halyard tension. We have a preset mark for our furl. And then we slowly furl the sail so that it goes in perfectly. Now, every cruiser on the Chesapeake should be doing this because they got the time and opportunity to do it. But instead, most of us point the boat head to wind, rag the hell out of the jib, and then pull as hard as we can, or heaven forbid we put it on the winch, right? And those are hard things on your sails. So if we can keep the luffing to a minimum, and we are really particular about how we manage our sails when we are handling them, you can extend the life of your sail a lot, all right? You want to check on the seams side of things. A lot of people will have a UV cover on their head sail. You really need to inspect that UV cover because it's doing its job. It's keeping the UV off the sail. But if its thread or seams are starting to give a little peekaboo, UV finds a way. It's not that different than water. And so you want to make sure that there's good integrity in that. And that's as easy as laying the sail out, going down, looking at it inch by inch, fiddling and pushing and pulling, maybe use a popsicle stick to make sure you can't get underneath any of the seams, flip it over and make sure that you've got no discoloration on any of the side that isn't covered by the UV, because that is telling you the story of a little bit of peekaboo, that there's that little sliver is being exposed to the sun. And that is where, you'd hate to have a sail that was perfect through 99% of it, and then had a 6-inch swath that was sun rotted, and that part is going to make the rest of the sail no longer viable. So really looking at all of those things. I think that with laminate sails, you want to go around and same thing. You're looking at every seam. Many of the seams on laminate sails are glued, right? And these sails require a little more care and feeding. What a lot of people will do is they'll take that sail down, they'll flake it, put it in the bag, and they throw it down in the boat. And in August in Annapolis, it just bakes in there, right? And that is really hard on the glues and the sails. Everybody will tell you, oh no, we're temperature stable to whatever. It's affecting the sail. So get in there and look at each one of those seams, make sure. And it really is a process. It's a fun team building exercise. If you're looking at doing this now, getting everybody who's going to come sailing with you this year out to look at the full sail inventory, give one person a clipboard who's doing edges, one person a clipboard who's doing seams, one person a clipboard who's doing corners and telltales. Well, we can go knock out all the sails in somewhere between 30 and 60 minutes and have a real good sense of all the different stuff that we have. So anyway, speaking of telltales are super important for your sails. They are the least expensive improvement you can make to your sailing. And you should have telltales on your mainsail, on your head sails, and where those telltales go matters. So for mainsails, it's really important, in my opinion, to have a telltale on the top batten. Okay, that is a super important indicator of your sail trim, is how much flow you've got, how much stall you have at the top of the sail plan. I also like one more telltale about, maybe a third of the way up from the clew on the leech. Maybe it's at your bottom draft stripe. This really helps you understand how much power you have in the bottom of your mainsail. Too often the outhaul is a set it and forget it control on boats, but a lot of power can be had by managing the lower portion of your mainsail, especially if you sail in the Chesapeake Bay and your range of sailing is from 7 to 17 knots. We can dramatically improve that from 3 to 30 if we learn how to trim the main properly and use the telltales to tell us the right story. On your head sails, jibs, Genoas included, it is really important to have a set of telltales about a third of the way down from the head. That is the telltale that the trimmer is using when they are trimming the sail to a close-hauled course. The luff telltales are there for the helmsperson, and they're important too. If you have windows, make sure those windows have good integrity and are not patched with packing tape, right? It's a cheap fix to get a new window in there. If it's foggy or the telltales stick all the time, it's time to have a tune-up on that, in my opinion. And it's something you can do on your own. They're 75 cents to put new telltales on. You can bring them into us. We'll do them for $7.50. But still, that's not that expensive, right? So definitely check those. Cords. On most of your sails, you're going to have a foot cord. On some sails, you'll have a luff cord, and you'll have a leech cord on those sails. Don't do what I did before I knew what cords did. I had a spinnaker and I was like, "Oh, what this string is doing in here. They must have left it when they built it." So I pulled it out. That sail didn't last very long. They are super important. They carry part of the load. And more importantly, they stop leach flutter, which is both super detrimental to your sail, but also super annoying to sail with. If you've got a sail that's all night long, it's hard to sleep on the off watch. So inspecting your cords, and I would suggest you might consider calibrating your cords. So on spinnakers, for instance, the luff cord plays a huge role in the kind of the entry shape of the sail. If it's too tight, you'll get this cupped effect. If it's too loose, you get this fluttering luff. There's sort of just the right amount of tension in there. And once you've found that, I'd suggest calibrating, meaning you need a mark at that spot so you can quickly get back to it. And then you ought to have a mark a 1/2 inch on either side of it, so you know where you are in the range as you adjust these things. It's not black magic. It's not, art. There's science to this, and science involves forming controls. So you have to have a 0 point to start from and then experiment from there. Same thing will go with your leech cords and foot cords on your other sails. If you calibrate them, meaning you mark the point where it was right this year, next year, if it's 2 inches past that point, something's going on in the sail. The answer isn't just keep pulling harder, right? There's something going on, and that can be one of those telltale signs. So they need to have good integrity. They are usually fairly well protected from UV, but definitely look at the portions that are outside of the sail to make sure that they're not breaking down. And then finally, check the way that they are affixed or cleated. So most sails these days have their leech cords, luff cords, and foot cords with a clam cleat, a plastic clam cleat. Those things are tough as nails. I'm really surprised at how durable they are. But if they're not holding, or because the metal ones oftentimes slip, believe it or not, or they've cracked and are failing, that's something you want to fix, because that again, very inexpensive fix, hard to fix offshore, and much easier to deal with before you go. Okay. Let's see here. What else do I have for you? So I did want to spend I think I'm about 3 minutes behind schedule here. I did want to spend just a couple of seconds talking about, do you have what you need? So when you are thinking about your sails, whether you're planning to go to Bermuda or not, but let's use Bermuda as the example, you really ought to think through a couple of things. One, what is your most common point of sail? What do you sail on the most? So for instance, if you're an Annapolis-based sailor, you sail here from, May 15 to August 15, you probably sail upwind in the morning and downwind in the afternoon, because you sail close hauled and greeting the sea breeze. You get somewhere down around Poplar Island, and then you turn and you sail downwind for home with a short reaching leg back into the harbor. If you're sailing to Bermuda, you're probably setting up for a reach or close reaching scenario. And so you have to ask yourself the question, do you have the sail that fits in that zone? Or can you make the sails that you have match that zone? Over here on the right side of this slide, you'll see a sail selection chart. So if it's 4 a.m. and I'm the watch captain, I don't want to have to think when the breeze goes to a 70-degree true wind angle at 16 knots, what's the right combination here? I want to be able to open up our Bible, our boat book, our sail selection, and do this. 17 knots, 70 TWA, relatively flat water. This is the sail that we should be in. And this goes beyond that. Not only this is the sail we should be in, that's first reef on the main and outboard lead number 3 or whatever it is. We should know exactly what those combinations are, and we should know what their sheeting combinations are as well. So your sheets, your cars, your inboard and outboard leads, all should be calibrated. So it's like a recipe. Sailing is a lot like cooking in that regard. We start with a set of known ingredients and a starting point, and then we pepper and salt to taste for the given moment, right? Because I can't put a chart for every possible condition, but I can get us awfully close. And this will prevent you from making mistakes. If you're racing to Bermuda, you can't, if you're the person in charge, you can't be up all the time. You have to honor the watch system. You need your rest to be smart so that your last tack is as good as your first, and your last decision is as good as your first. It's this type of sales selection chart that will help you make good choices in those combat moments and allow you to trust that somebody else will make the same decision you will because they're using the same set of information. So it's super important. It also is a great way for you to reveal where there's a hole in your existing inventory. So if you've got sales that will get you upwind in 10 to 22 knots, but won't get you on a beam reach from 7 to 27, you can figure out where these gaps are and identify what you might want to purchase or acquire to fill that space. And then you have to think about two other components. The first is you have to think about what works best for your boat. I was joking before the presentation that when Code Zeros came out, everybody had to have a Code Zero, right? And it is absolutely the magic bullet when it's the magic bullet. But it's the magic bullet for most of us for about 8% of our sailing. So if you blow your entire sail budget on 8% of your sailing and you never step into the Code Zero, you're gonna feel kind of silly when you get to Bermuda.
Is that on the chart there? Could you point it out?
Yeah, the green blob here is the Code Zero. Yep. And the other side of this is that sales have changed a lot. So we now offer Code Zeros that fit in even narrower wind bands. And then there's kind of an all-purpose Code Zero. Cloth and technology furling systems have come so far to allow us to do that. So what do you need? What's your pain point? What are you missing in your sales selection chart? Needs to be a very serious consideration. And you should run through a process where you think, how can I trick the sale that I have into being that sale? So with that in mind, we think a lot about inboard, outboard sheeting positions that can dramatically change the character of a sale. So you really need to think through the whole thing. What are you going to do? And this is really fun. We're a long ways off from a race to Bermuda here. There's a ton of fun doing these what if scenarios. And you can look at historical weather data to give you good information about what you can expect and then try to identify what works for your boat. The last part to consider is that you're probably not buying sails specifically for a Bermuda race. You're buying sails for your boat. And so you've got to think about not only how will that sail impact your race to Bermuda, but also how might it affect your rating in the other sailing that you do. Sails are measured differently, counted differently for Circa, for ORC Cruiser, for ORC, for PERF. And so not only do you need to think about what do you need in your sales selection chart for what the boat would do best with, but also you have to take some consideration into how will this impact my rating and is it worth it? Okay. All right, with that, got a few minutes. Questions? Post St. Patty's Day. Big IU win last night. Go Hoosiers. I don't know if anybody else stayed up for the game. Big loss for Purdue, even better. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there any way of figuring out that chart on your boat without just going out there and sailing in every condition?
Yes, yes. So start with what you got and start with your assumptions. So if you just go get a legal pad of gridded paper and you start with what is your wind cap, right? Because we all have limits, right? There's a limit where we're racing, there's a limit where we're sailing, and there's a limit where we're surviving. And everybody's a little different on that chart. So let's say you're sailing from 4 to 20 knots, okay? So that'll go down the left side, and then across the bottom, you're gonna put true wind angles. So you can start at 50, let's say, 45 if you choose, and then go up to 180. And you can do that in 10-degree increments. And then just fill in the squares with like a hash or an X of where you think your current sail inventory lies. And then, once you've done that, based on your existing knowledge, look at where you haven't filled in any squares. And then you can start to ask, okay, well, maybe if we did an outboard sheet lead forward at the shrouds, we could actually carry the Genoa from 120 to 140, and it would still work pretty well. So now we color that in a little differently. And when you get done with all of that, share it with other folks, and especially if you've got anybody who's got your same boat configuration, and say, how does this look? Well, there you go. So I'm giving you permission to go sailing then, because you do need to do a little bit of testing to see what works. But start with what you know, and then go out and challenge it. So on that picture of the Amel, that's a husband and wife team. They started sailing January 2nd, 2021. We crossed the Atlantic in January of 2022. So they invested a ton of time and energy into getting ready and going sailing. And they learned a ton. But we created the sail selection chart as a marriage saving tool because we needed a home base. When he wanted to be like this and she wanted to be like this, we needed an arbiter who could help declare that without me being there. And so the sail selection chart for them became less about which sail to put up, because they've got all the sails up all the time. They've got their jib, staysail, mainsail. But what were the combinations? So if we were sailing close hauled in that boat, that's about a 52-degree true wind angle. If we were sailing close hauled in flat to moderate water in 18 knots of breeze, classic USVI, BVI conditions, then we were going to be in the first reef on the main and a full jib. And that allowed them to always go to the same spot to start with. And then they could ask, is this right? And sure enough, over time, they started adding horsepower as they got more and more comfortable. It was really important to have that starting point that they could agree on. And then they had a structured conversation about how to add to that. Because if they were actually sailing a 65-degree true wind angle, they were going from, from Norman to the Baths. They weren't sailing close hauled. Well, suddenly now they're a little off the sail selection chart, so they could start to be more creative in what they wanted. And that became really useful. So start with what you know, and then you'll see gaps. Figure out if you can fill those gaps with what you've got. And if you can't, then start thinking about how you want to fill it. Cool. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Kristen, without going down a rabbit hole.
No promises.
What do you like in terms of material for sheets and halyard?
Well, basically anything with a Dyneema core these days has come way down in price, gone way up in usability and durability. And it's kind of a magic material in my opinion. I really like that. Now, for some boats, it's not the right fit because you're taking the loads, transferring it to the hardware, and you'll start to blow stuff up. So you have to be a little bit careful about that, depending on the age of your boat, the age of your hardware, so on and so forth. But anybody with a few hours of investment on the internet can figure out how to throw a slice these days. And then that material is easy to keep on board, easy to have handy for quick fixes and that kind of stuff. For sheets in particular, I like to have a pretty robust cover over a high-tech core, because I like the ability to set calibration marks in my sheets that don't creep and move. And I like the ability to fix it on the fly if something happens. And that's pretty easy to fix. With halyards in particular, I tend to strip everything back to its core if I can hide it in the mast. So for instance, take a jib halyard on a roller furling head sail jib these days. The system that I'm employing on almost every boat that I sail on is that I've got a Dyneema, call it Amsteel, whatever the material is. Every brand kind of has their own brand name, but it's mostly the same sorts of material. SK90, whatever we're using. And inside the mast, I have that stripped because I don't need the UV protection. And then where it exits, I actually create kind of an 8-to-1 purchase system that allows me to adjust that halyard tension. and then I have a chaser tail to get that sail out. If we're doing a lot of head sail changes, I need a full length halyard, and that I'll have covered in the portion that is outside. For main halyard, same thing. You can step down the size of these ropes so much. They're stronger than steel, and they're just not terribly expensive anymore, especially if you invest in taking care of them. So, UV is the threat to ropes is just as much as it is to sails. But I've really gone high tech in everything that I use these days, in part because it's user friendly and you can use reasonable size lines even in high load applications. Yep.
Most boats, like in the last 15 years or so, are pretty much designed for asymmetric spinnakers.
Yeah.
But there are some boats out there, whether there's some new or earlier boats that can handle either one, symmetric or asymmetric.
Yep.
Do you recommend on those that can handle both types of sails to keep symmetric spinnakers still in the inventory, or do you think they've been OBE'd?
It's a great question. The fact of the matter is in a straight line, an asymmetrical sail is faster than a symmetrical sail. Okay, so if you are doing distance racing, point to point, you've got the same range that you have with a symmetrical sail. You can sail basically the same angles, but you're going to be faster in a straight line. If you are maneuvering regularly, a symmetrical sail is faster than an asymmetrical sail because it never collapses, never inverts. So it's drawing throughout the entire maneuver. Now you can get at that through better jibing technique with asymmetrical sails, but the fact of the matter is at some point you're turning that sail inside out, and so you're going to be downspeed for some portion of it. For offshore sailing, I'm a big safety guy. I'm actually speaking at the Safety at Sea seminar this year. Happy to be doing that. Hope to see some of you guys there. But taking the pole out of the equation dramatically improves the safety of your sailboat. So you don't have to put somebody on the foredeck to jibe. You don't have the flying pole, in the middle of the night. You have reduced amounts of hardware that are connected to the sail that can reach out and grab you. So I think from a safety standpoint, asymmetrical spinnakers are generally safer than symmetrical. Now you could find exceptions to that for sure. So with our ability to build sails that sail similar angles and the ability to go in a straight line faster with an asymmetrical sail, I encourage people to go asymmetrical. But I love sailing symmetrical spinnakers. They are so cool and so fun and so beautiful. And frankly, there are some boats that don't benefit from an asymmetrical sail. Asymmetrical spinnakers kind of get their juice by generating apparent wind, right? So as we sail those higher angles, the apparent wind increases and goes forward, which is what allows us to ultimately sail down to the same true wind angle, even if the apparent wind angle is further forward. But if you're sailing on, I don't know, your boat, right? You're not going to generate that same amount of apparent wind. A big, heavy cruising style boat, a blue water offshore racer, may not get the same benefit out of an asymmetrical sail as far as performance is concerned, but they will get the benefits of ease of use, reduced handling, and safety. So it's kind of that's a dealer's choice to some degree. I think that for boats that are intended to have asymmetrical spinnakers and their rigs were designed around that, the improvements in top-down furling are making massive improvements in safety and boat handling, and also mean that people who would have been hesitant to put a spinnaker up before, or would have been hesitant to put a spinnaker up before in certain conditions, now have the opportunity to do so. You can't really do that with a symmetrical spinnaker. So, there's lots of reasons to go asim, but it's not as easy as asims are better than symmetricals because to some degree it's boat specific. Did that answer your question or confuse it more? Okay. Great. Thank you very much for giving me the time this morning, and know this, that I live here in Annapolis. Even if I travel a great deal for sailing, especially in the wintertime, I'm heavily invested in the education side of sailing, which means that you don't have to buy a sail from me to get an answer from me. So if you have any questions about sails, about sailing, My card is sitting outside on the table. I do hope you'll reach out. My email is on that card. My cell phone number is on that card. Please call, email, text, whatever, anytime. I hope to be your tech support this year and beyond. So thank you very much.
Thanks, KB. I think at this point, we can take why don't we say a 10-minute break, and then we'll have a raffle and we'll get on with the next speaker.
Katie, you're getting multiple thumbs up from Zach Berry.
Oh, good. I love that.
I gotta make sure to tell him I said hi. It's a great presentation.
She and I worked together at Navy. And, really got a chance to know her this year.
Yeah, she's on. Yeah, great guy. Yeah.
Knowledgeable, personable, and year.
Yeah.
Like you engage in like all that something.
Yes, exactly right. I mean, a very gentle detergent, soft pencil brush. And then you need to have the ability to
Just getting out of bed.
up a little bit. So that could be as simple as like, you know, some still doors, you build a little bit of your.
Yes.
Don't let this guy sit. But you know, those are. Yeah. You get it. Right? I wouldn't wait till the other year. The day they put out his route and fill, deploy that sail, close the lid and then let it dry. If there's any reason at all, you don't want your sail like that. So you can sometimes put a little extra good from action. You want to get as much of that water regularly. Is the trick.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the year, you're gonna
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Great talk.
Hey, thanks.
See you again.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Wow.
How are things?
Good, good. We honored them.
Nice.
3 years ago.
Okay.
Kept it on the magazine, and this year we're moving to yacht. We honored the boating club. It was great for us.
Sure. That's kind of the point though, right? I mean, that's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
It's, you know, if that place is working the way it's supposed to, people come, they learn, they get hooked, they join, they get hooked more, they buy, then they come back.
Yeah.
Where they're like, over the, you know, dealing with all this stuff.
Right. Yeah. A buddy of ours, she has the J. So we were failing with town. And
20 is one of my favorite boats of all time. We had the Euro Trash Girl for years. So yeah, what a great boat. And it's actually a really good boat to go to Bermuda. Because it loves to lean on it and go.
he's interested, he's about our age, his dad originally has a boat, he sort of inherited it, and he's growing his crew. That's why we're at this beer can stage right now.
Well, beer cans are a great way to get everybody fired up. You sail such spunky angles in the beer can race. That's a good, you know, short course.
And then still doing our Thursday night
Good.
committee.
Sweet.
With
Eric.
Eric.
Yeah, nice.
You know Eric.
Yeah, yes, he is. How you doing? Kristen. Nice to see you. Yes, I do. I was.
Came in late.
Yeah, let me grab it. Yeah, thanks for making the trip.
That'll be a safe harbor.
Hasn't happened, yeah. So,
You know, once it's sold, you know.
you know, it's fun.
He,
You know, once it's sold, that'll be.
fairly often, not as often as I like, because now we're starting racing.
Okay.
So we have to. Fine. This boat or our cruiser, right?
Yeah.
We have fun. But we later passed on the J120.
Okay, well, we're over there all the time.
So it's,
Believe it or not, we've
and then actually.
into the skipjack world, or so we've been building all the skipjack sales over there, which.
Those guys were them on their Wednesday night racing. Today.
Yeah, appreciate it.
That's a blast. And that guy, he's been racing a long time.
And yes, well, so, I use electric board initially,
And now.
and then once I sure, it marks.
It'll be on for 2 hours.
Yeah. There's a number of different things. One, somebody's asked my local roadside, right? Because the covers and the floors are independent. So that the cover can't creep, adds a little bit of.
Yeah.
Also, you gotta let the station out to a very specific measure from the end.
Right. Yeah.
I built a good sheet on.
Yeah, well, it'd be easy if I lived here, I could listen closer to.
And so when I put your Egyptian on.
Just about checks out, 45. But right now, I work up there, it's better to have it here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of these, we'll see. I spent all summer last, you did see that.
Yeah, there's little times.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's break it. Right, we're gonna go.
I know, I wish I didn't have as many stories. And at this point, I should know better.
It is.
So.
Well, if it's ever helpful in those types of situations, I'm always happy to give an assessment.
So this, so this drive is not working.
Is that going on the microphone?
So the microphone now is, the microphone isn't on. We got this.
Okay, good. Yeah.
So where
Let me
is
know what I can do.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Thanks, Alex. I know that.
Yeah.
Listen, I'll send you a template of how to start, and then you go in and start. It's a really fun experience. Then you start experimenting. Right, let's try this. It's a really yeah, and it just it's 1 in the morning. You don't want to have to think about it. You want to be able to look and go, it's this. And then you can start to think about it. Pretty close.
But just to see, I want to make sure the chat thing is working.
Yeah.
Any questions for KB?
So,
We're gonna do this integration now.
yeah, because it doesn't have a.
But the thing I didn't see was, the chat, I figured that out. I looked at everybody. You're sitting there, nobody's sitting over there.
Supposed to put the read. Then we would have. Load up this. Exactly. It's also really good for cruiser.
This is one of those things where I can flip over to. Oh, the share screen.
Yeah.
Right. On the amount they always say KB says.
I should pull this up on my phone. So I say, we're actually looking at.
Starting. Then it goes a long way. Yeah, and, you know, to be honest, I work with a lot of husband and wife teams.
Yeah.
And there's no universality about who likes you. But I don't mind. Yeah. Right, well, this is where the book comes in, right? You say, well,
No, I don't even know the link that you.
Yeah, you'll have to get that from,
then we'll shake
I don't have. a battery in it.
I was paid.
Hang on. That's what's going on. That's what we're seeing. So I don't know.
Number one, right, so I work in. And so as so I went, and I her say to a friend, oh my gosh, that coach really paid off. She said, I don't know if he knows anything about sailing, but he's a hell of a marriage guy. I was like, that's my company.
So this is typically his PowerPoint, right?
Yep.
You're able to share input, or do you have to have a share screen?
It's a shared screen.
How you doing?
Everything seems to be working.
I think so.
Trying to figure it out. Oh, it says we are screen sharing up there.
More battery.
Mhm.
So it's outputting with that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
That link that I sent you, can you just try and get on that link?
Covered in makeup. It's okay. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, let's just gonna.
That guy was at the top of my house last week.
Mike, he was asking where the presentation was in. He was after the presentation of it.
Right. I think the microphone is coming through somewhere. One sec.
It wasn't making a.
Yeah, so I had to. It won't, that microphone won't work. There's something wrong with this USB, and that's why we have to use this. So hopefully. Where's the Zoom here? I'm just gonna. I'm just gonna. One second.
Yeah. Yes, yes. Yeah, I think glasses.
I can't get to that. You're not gonna be able to.
Okay, so just leave this up.
Yep. And there's something in the chat, right? I'm gonna have to sign in on my phone and try and do this.
What are you trying to do? What are you trying to do? I can return the meeting.
Huh?
I can return the meeting.
Hang on. What? Oh,
I can return the meeting.
yeah, hold on, no. You're sharing this screen, so. Damn it. All right, yeah, there's your slide share, so.
Okay. Now, how do I, let's see, where's our chat though?
So you're just gonna advance the slides for him, Ken?
Okay, and how do I see the chat though?
I don't know, I mean, we're working on that.
Hey, the chat's just me saying that that I can see the screen because there was questions about whether the screen, whether Trevor's slide was showing.
Can you hear our audio?
Yeah, everything sounds great. Everything looks good. Everything's had thumbs up.
Good.
Thanks.
Oh, sorry.
I did that.
Good.
deliberately.
Yeah, so that you can just, all right. Oh, okay. All right, we're good. They just won't see you, they'll see your slides.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I just want to introduce Trevor Harney, who will talk about rigging. And thanks again to KB. But Trevor here will talk more about the stuff that isn't supposed to move. Thank you.
As I stated, my name is Trevor Harney. I started the company back in 2013, so doing it for 10 years now. And I really enjoy it. Love meeting the people, sailing on different boats, and basically having a great time. The offshore sailing specifically. So I've done a bunch of offshore races, Newport and Halifax, and been to Bermuda 3 or 4 times. Great Lakes, up and down the East Coast. So if you don't have rigging specific questions, if you have other questions about either coaching or practicing, or coming out on a boat to do a practice day to actually use the equipment that I install, feel free to ask during the seminar, before, or after, doesn't bother. I'm not a very good presenter, I'll be honest, but I work better with questions, so feel free to interrupt at any time. I'm gonna go to the next slide, please. So just a quick overview of what we're going to discuss. Sort of what bits and bobs on the boats, or what they're actually called. It is important. General maintenance will basically solve almost all the repair work that I do. So it's extremely important, especially if you're going offshore. We talk about scheduling, when things should be replaced, running rigging, sending rigging, and then cover some failure points, and also how I work aloft and some of the other options if you're looking to climb your own mast to do your own work. Go ahead, next slide. Typical and standing rigging, you're gonna have D1s, which are all your diagonals, and we start from the bottom up. Same thing with the spreaders. First and second spreader. These are the very top ones here will be your D3s. That's it. We go to the next one. And cutter rig, a solent rig, you have a baby stay, and all these basically, if you have these on your boat, know what they're called. And if you don't know how to use them properly, then feel free to ask basically any sailmaker or rigger. These are going to be your 2 best bets on how to set up the rig and tune it to match with their specific sails that they're making for your boat. So it's quite important for me to talk to whatever sailmaker that you're working with. So let me go to the next one. These are sheaves. These are shivs. They're very different. I can tell you how many people say, "Can you replace the shivs on my boat?" And I don't do that work. You gotta contact your own guy. Go to the next slide. For general maintenance, we'll get right into it. Cleaning is very simple. It's freshwater rinse will solve like 90% of your problems, honestly. wash your boat down, and not just the deck, all the bits that go into the deck. Your turnbuckles, the blocks, even the winches, you're not gonna wash out the grease, don't worry about it. We can put more in. Lubricating, a lot of people don't understand you can lubricate like clutches. So I have a slide in here to actually show you where to lubricate them. A typical 3-in-1 oil that you can get from a hardware store will solve a lot of that if it's used. There are different lubricants that you will use for things that should slide and things that should roll, and we'll cover more of that. Hydraulics, they're kind of hose on that, takes some special tools to do that, and seal kits, and they're very specific to whatever hydraulic cylinders that you're trying to rebuild. Interval pumps, it's a little more complicated, so I don't recommend doing that yourself. They also have to be tested for 24 hours to hold the pressure. So carbon spars, they do break down, just like if you don't put gel coat on fiberglass, the resin inside is UV sensitive and can flux and bad things. So either get the UV stable clear coat or paint them. And it's very common to paint carbon spars from the factory. The rig inspections, we're going to go in a lot of detail on that. And two really good things. One, you're going to find any problems that happen early on, or before they become catastrophic. And two, if nothing else, it's a snapshot in time for your insurance company to say, look, I had a rig inspection. It was fine, before we left, and it broke during this event. It was not neglect. And then rig tune is going to make your boat sail better, honestly. And it also is going to protect the hardware that you have on the boat. Most rigs that I get on to adjust the rigging tension of it are almost always too loose. Every single one. I've never walked onto a boat that was too tight. It's amazing. So go to the next one. I'm sure we've seen a lot of these in West Marine and their inflated prices. And we have a few super lube. Basically, we're going to use that on the turnbuckles. It's a synthetic grease. They put different type of lubricants in that same bottle, so please read the label. This one is Tep Gel and Tep 45. That's just another off-brand name of it. Use that basically anywhere stainless goes into aluminum. You'll get some pretty serious corrosion. I got plenty of pictures of that. So that is very tacky, and I don't use that on turnbuckles mostly because of it makes it quite a bit harder to turn. So extra friction. This BioShield. I use that anywhere that you're going to find where you can't get into it because it's in spray form. It's really nice. It's like a wax protectant or coating. These two, I know a lot of you have a can of this on board, and it's used for almost everything. Anything that should slide, use this. Anything that should roll, use that. If you don't have that, use 3-in-1 oil. You'll get 5 times as much for same price. So you go to the next slide. So before the McLube, which is a dry lube basically. If you spray it on bearings like traveler cars, Jeep cars that are moving with ball bearings, unfortunately it becomes too slick and the ball bearings no longer roll, they skid. So if you've ever watched racing cars or something like that and they lock it up on Formula One or something, they'll get a flat spot in the tire. And then once that happens, those ball bearings stop at that flat spot every time and it just gets worse and worse. So use this on some oil on bearings. Use this on any sails, basically slider cars that don't have ball bearings. I use probably half a can of this to put up one sail, and it makes it a whole lot easier. So thank you. This is an example of what not to use. Please don't use NECs. It's a mess. It's the wrong stuff. And as you can see, it doesn't have this, and they put it all over the falls as well, which gets stuck with the grease. So in maintaining winches, if you put grease on the falls, you will end up with falls that don't work anymore. They stick to the main shaft, and that the thing just spins both ways, and that's dangerous. So taking these apart, there's pretty straightforward, and there's lots of YouTube videos on it, and cut a hole in the box and do all that. If you don't have the box, then pull the drum off, make sure you put your hand away. Otherwise, these things love to go swimming. So don't ask me how I know. The lubrication, we'll go ahead, go to the next slide, please. This is what I use to clean them. So mineral spirits in a big tray, like you put a turkey in or something like that, holidays. Soak it, take all your parts, put them in there, and you get a stiff wire brush or like a brass brush or something, or aluminum brush. You can also use a stiff plastic nylon. That cleans up pretty well. The problem is if you delay doing this, winch grease will get hard over time, and that's when you see the pulse start sticking. And if it gets really hard, then just doesn't really do anything. So clean off all the old stuff. And then 3-in-1 on the balls, and then some type of winch grease. I use Harkin and Blue Mark for the two.
I've always used diesel oil. Is that okay?
Yeah, to clean
From, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Any solvent, I use mineral spirits because it's a little bit nicer on my hands and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you got a gallon of diesel on, go for
Yeah.
it. Won't hurt anything. Yeah, everything in here is really, really robust, honestly. You can use brake clean, but that's, pretty hardcore. I would reserve that for the really tough ones. So, go to the next slide, please. On to clutches. Anybody in here have a slipping clutch? So, yeah, a couple. There's always a few, and there's many reasons for that. One of them is these springs can get tired and they don't engage the cam as quickly as they should. Also, the cams can wear out and the rope itself can start to wear out. And usually a lot of people change the line out and they use a larger size because that grips better. Cams, the clutches are rated for the line diameter. So if you see a clutch on a shelf, like a D1 from Lumar, the big domino ones, they're very specific in line diameter. These have a much wider range. This one is 1/4 inch to 5/16, so that's pretty tight. Some of the other larger ones are 8mm to 14mm, something like that. It's quite a range. So the 8mm, you're not getting 1,000 pounds of holding force, you're getting 500. That 1,000 pounds is for the max rated line. There's not too many boats rolling around with 14mm tires on. So something to keep that in mind. We can also change this to a higher tech line, which I have some examples out there that have different grades inside of it that'll help them grip better. We can add a separate cover to the outside just for clutches as well, for the higher snow them. So there are ways to solve slipping clutches. As far as maintenance goes, same thing. You can get a lot done with a toothbrush. Just clean it up, and then I would put some 3-in-1 oil, put a few drops and exactly where these friction points are, and you will prevent that from happening. Basically, that's corrosion where the anodizing has come off on the aluminum handle. So next slide, please. This was an example of maintenance that was deferred for decades. The seals, this is a furling motor for a 49-footer with in-mast furling. It's electric motor, not hydraulic, but that, and this is a person who goes offshore racing quite frequently. That is the hot cable going to the motor, and there's just, as soon as you pulled it out, the thing just almost came apart in my hand. So fix that. Then also your seals on these motors. This doesn't apply to everybody, but if you have a big boat with power winches, they do require maintenance. Not much, like every 5 years or something. It's recommended to change out the grease inside, or if you have oil, change that out. But obviously that is what we call a chocolate milkshake on oil mixes with water, and it looks like that and does not lubricate very well. So we can go to the next slide, please. Replacement schedules. I get asked this a lot about when should I replace my rigging. Usually the people that are asking me this have 40-year-old rigging. They call it loading. So the official rule of thumb, industry standard, is if you're in the Caribbean, every 10 years. If you're running a charter boat down there, they're changing every 10 years. It's just the cost of doing business. And that's because due to the extended season, the extended UV exposure, and a tremendous amount of salt. They live in the ocean for all the time. So they do recommend you pull the mast every 5 years, just for a check. I don't know, too many people pull the mast every 5 years, it's expensive. So up here, I will usually go 15 to 20 years, depending as a max to keep your standing rigging. If you're past 20, I don't know any rigger that's going to say, yeah, you're good to go. Because the problem is the insurance company wants an inspection done, and that's just to get them out of the liability if it comes down, and then it comes back on me. So I can't say, even if it looks great, I can tell you it looks great, but if it's over 20 years, we have to recommend that you replace it. Winch maintenance is, every couple of years. If you're on a race boat doing, 80 to 100 starts a year, every single weekend and beating on stuff, do it, once or twice a year. It's cheap. everybody knows what a winch costs, they're expensive, lease is cheap. So maintenance will save your parts in the long run. Running rigging, again, this one is the same as the standing rigging. There have been boats where I can't do the inspection because the hires are in such bad shape. So if you know you need a new hire, let me know, I'll bring them with me and I'll install it and then do the inspection on a fresh hire. So I'm not doing one from 1987. So, it is really as needed. Again, if you're talking about like Grand Prix boats, you're burning through sheets halfway through the season. A cruising boat doesn't have that same wear and tear. Yeah, but you can try, but you're not going to be burning through equipment that quickly. And that really is a sort of, use your best judgment on that one. I know KB talked about earlier different types of lines and what you use for hires and things, and so mentioned UV is the killer of them all, and he's absolutely right. So,
Are there clues that you look for?
yes.
To let you know whether it's over 15 years?
Yes, usually, they do change the braid, so being in the industry, I can look at it and say, they stopped making this a while ago. Yeah, that's a pretty good giveaway. Also, if it has way more mold on it than your bathroom, that's also another good one. If it's green and corroded, basically all those particles, you have an ecosystem growing inside of that, and they're just rubbing the fibers against each other, and then that's internal shape that you really can't get out. I have some examples of people using pressure washers on. Don't do that. We'll cover that more in more detail. There's a scratch test too with your thumb. Yeah, your fingernail, scratch it, and if you see fibers coming off and your fingernail is hairy, then that's a problem. Yeah, the cover shot.
What about running rigging?
Yeah, that is for the running rigging.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
the standing rigging.
the standing rigging, will cover more detail in another section. But yeah, there are ways to sort of maximize the lifespan of standing rigging, making sure that it keeps breathing. Stainless steel likes oxygen. If you can avoid it, don't tape it, don't coat it, don't cover it, just leave it be in the sun. And it'll stay stainless for a very long time. I know a lot of I lovingly say Benehuntalinas, like to put the PVC covers on the standing rigging. I recommend completely against that. I wish the dealers and the makers of their boat would stop doing it because it does trap moisture. And every boat I go on, I slide it up and it's covered in mold and green stuff. And good. Furling systems maintenance, obviously cheaper than a replacement part. You can maintain almost all of them. The Pro Furl ones have seal bearings. I'm sure there's another brand out there. Those are the ones that have kind of like a greenish anodizing on the drum and the bearing. And I'm not a fan of those because of that. You can't maintain. You just basically replace them. So, but that is part of the price point between the different manufacturers. Some of them will use the Portland drilling bearings like Parkin will, or you get to Selden or Bracknell, which we use stainless steel bearings. So if you are purchasing a new furler, just take that in consideration. Can this be maintained? Can I get in there and lubricate things? Running rigging, again, the scratch test. Line will chafe. That's one of the biggest things in Annapolis to Bermuda, or if you're going to sailing 24 hours a day nonstop for a week. That rope is going to wear. If you go into the CCSC, when they talk about sails and rigging, and if you're setting a storm, try-sail or any storm sail for that matter, they always tell you to run two pairs of sheets because one of them's going to go let go. And you don't want to be up there trying to tie a ball and get smacked in the face at 60 knots. So, and we have other covers and brought a couple samples you can look at with the Dyneema chafe sleeve, which works really well on almost anything that we can cover. There's also a paint which will include which will hold grip and stuff, and chafe paint that you can use it. The other things to look for besides the fingernail thing and the mold or dirt in the line, overloading. So if the line is extremely stiff when it didn't used to be, I mean you're up way up there in working mode. That'll usually show itself if your gauge stops working on your hydraulics or something, and you go with the fiber backstay and you're going nuts with it. You will get inconsistencies, bulges, and then you will get the line will actually be very stiff. You're compressing at that point. So any pulled strands, obviously, if you have a 8-strand Dyneema line and 2 strands are pulled, then it's not evenly loading. So it's a lot of common sense stuff. If it looks wrong, take a picture of it, send it out. People, we can usually diagnose it over time. Melted cover, again, not usually a big problem on racer cruisers. It's more for all-out racers with huge winches on them. And ASIM kites, when you're trying to jibe a really big kite and you're smoking the sheet off and have to pull it in real fast. So you can have substantial loads on that can melt the cover. And we do have other blended covers that deal with the heat a lot better than just the polyester. Don't forget about your anchor. It's required. And it has to be ready to use. So I don't think the other one there on the left was ready to use. This is not a proper stop. I did get that out, but it took a very long time, and then we just put the donuts on there. But the other example is if you don't know how to do splicing, talk to somebody, watch a video. Don't tie knots in Dyneema. They don't like it. They don't hold. This is an example on a lifeline. And it's just a knot, and it's a poor fitting, thimble inside of it. Lifelines are required in raw source, so they don't want that anyway. So they don't like it. Please. Photo on the left is a great example for running rigging using a pressure washer. I talked about earlier. You're not cleaning it. You're driving all the dirt into the fibers. I don't know of any vacuum that can get that off. So when your line starts looking like this, yeah, it just isn't. This was an example of things that weren't working. This was actually a well sailed J35 here on the bay, and they said, yeah, our alcohol is really hard to adjust. And we're like, yeah, I found an issue. I don't know how they were doing it before, but it wasn't efficient. So basically, this comes from improperly coiling line and taking care of your running ready. Don't put twists in if you can. It looks really nice, but there's a way to just sort of lay it over your hand. And then also you can throw it behind, do a search for how to coil rope, a climber's rope. And they'll show you the technique for laying it over your shoulder. So you can do, I can do a 2-to-1 hired on a huge catamaran, and I don't get tired because my arms and shoulders, all the weight's on up here. So if you end up putting a lot of twist into it, they eventually will work their way back into your purchase system. And in this case, it was inside the boom, so it's quite difficult to get the full beam cap.
For maintenance on like sheets and halyards, I always heard, throw them in a mesh bag and wash them and Downy. Is that still?
Yeah, that works really well.
Okay.
I don't put them in a washing machine. I just put them in a tub. Same thing, and I kind of agitate them a little bit, and then I let them soak for a couple hours. Rinse the water out, and then give like 2 more tubfuls of fresh water rinsing, and that you'll be amazed at the dirt that comes out of it. So
You put any detergent or not? Okay,
Yeah.
like Dawn or something?
yeah, something mild. I would stay away from like I've seen on TV like OxyClean. I know a lot of people use it. Obviously, no bleach at all.
Yeah.
And that will severely compromise the strength of the line. So, but yeah, you can bring a lot of lines back from the dead. I've heard of people putting a little bit of fabric softener in it too. I don't think that hurts anything at all. But use it sparingly. If you put too much fabric softener in, it is kind of a waxy coating, and that'll make it harder for the hireds to grip in, like your jib sheets on a winch that uses friction. You can reduce it. Obviously, you need more reps now. So. And then up here is just an example of some hireds that we did. These are all stripped hireds, which means the cover's been removed and it's bare Dyneema, as Chris was talking about. And in addition to having that lighter weight hired, you can save a significant amount of weight of logs if you're running 5 hireds. If you have 1 jib and 1 main, and they're both on furlers, that is what it is. And it's not, you're not going to save a lot. So talk to whoever rigger you like to use, and they should be able to tell you give you the honest answer if it's worth it or not. What we did after we removed the cover, we put a Dyneema chafe sleeve cover on every one of them, but only about that much. So when the sail's at full hoist, that's what's in over top of the sheaves in the sheave box, so it's not chafing on because that main's going to go up and it's not coming down for 4, 5, 6 days. And then this is just the additional paint for identification. There's a special chafe paint that increases grip and cuts down a little bit on the wear and tear. So it's also a good indicator to use a wear indicator to figure out where it's shaping from and how bad is it before it eats into the actual shape sleeve itself. This, take a picture of it, shoot me an email. This is probably the best tuning guide I've seen out there. Seldom gives it away for free. It's awesome. It gives you a couple, I don't know if you can read the small print here, but it's a cap shroud too loose, starting from the left. Too tight, lower shroud too tight, bow shroud too loose, which is, that's dangerous. And that's dangerous. Basically, if you're sailing close haul and going upwind, the easiest way to talk about a rig tune and making sure that you're in the ballpark is go close haul upwind and then sight up the mast and see if, and you can tell there's the hardest part is telling whether the lower shroud is too tight and it's pulling inward, or if the cap shroud's too loose, and that's when a loose gauge or some other measuring method, a tension gauge, can help you determine which one is closer. Next slide, please. For rig inspections, which you're kind of looking at, we'll get back into the rig tuning a little bit. Honestly, you can have an entire seminar as I touched on earlier. Pre-bend on a rig tune refers to how much is going out and the mast is at rest sitting at the dock, and your sailmaker will use that, and they have a specific pre-bend they want in their head for their sail, and that's the lump curve of that sail. So again, we need to work together and know what he's building so I can tune the rig to your sails. Here's tuning guys for J24s, 80s, 111s, you name it, and everybody in Quantum and North Sail, they all have their own tuning guide because they have their own sail designs that they think are faster than the other guys. So don't use a Quantum tuning guide with the North Sail's mainsail. It's not too good. For rig inspections, obviously anything bent, busted, corrosion. Check your cotter and clevis pins. You're supposed to open them up a little bit. I have pictures where they're not, or they got the old tiny mustache thing going on. That's a little bit too much. You don't need that. 20 degrees is really all you need. Probably get away with less than that. Well, all that does is make it very slow and painful to get them out later. So you don't need a whole lot. Don't go crazy with them. Toggles, they get overlooked and get cracked. They usually crack right where they bend over. So keep an eye on that. Obviously the sheaves, gooseneck connections, that a good picture of a failed one. They are a cast aluminum in most cases, and they use big stainless bolts to hold them together. So you have a cast piece of aluminum and a big corrosion piece in the middle of it, and it eats away at that casting. So that can lead to a pretty spectacular failure. Hydraulics, basically what I'm looking for is to make sure there aren't any leaks in its holding pressure. So usually when I'll do a short test. So I'll get on a boat, I'll lock down the backstay adjuster or whatever hydraulic it is. I'll build some pressure in it, probably depending on the boat, 1,000, 2,000 pounds. And then I'll climb the rig, do my inspection, everything. And then I check it, an hour later to see if it's still holding. If it's not, then obviously we document that and suggest that you can rebuild them up to a couple times. After that, I don't recommend rebuilding them. It's better just to replace the cylinder and the pump and the whole unit. So, and they are very proud of their seals. The seal kits on those things are $600. They're just the little seals in there. So the chain plates are difficult on a lot of boats and easy on other ones. So if you have chain plates that are easy to inspect, it doesn't hurt to wipe them down and clean them. If you have water seeping in through them, then they need to be resealed. A lot of times, what people will do is just pull up the deck plates themselves and then put a little piece of caulking or fuel tape or whatever you want, and they screw them back down. But they don't actually inspect the chain plate itself where it passes through the deck. And again, stainless likes air, likes to breathe. So if it has a close fitting deck joint on it, then that's where it's going to fail. So it won't fail, usually won't fail up at the top or in the bottom of the cabin, which wiping it down, keeping it clean, but it'll fail where you can't see it. Unfortunately, that goes back to why we change out pretty much all rigging after 20 years, no questions asked, because it looks great and performs great until it doesn't, and then it's spectacular failure. Supporting structures, a lot of times that'll get overlooked. There's a boat I was working on, and if you have water around the mast, most of them are built with a nice little dome, so it sheds it off. So if you have water around and sitting there in a puddle, you really should be looking at to see if the deck is compressing. So the deck itself can compress, and then the compression post can compress, or the mast step that the post is on can compress. So we all look at that as well during the inspection. The mast boot is pretty much, check the boxes, is it there, is it whole? Been on a lot of boats where people say, I got a ton of water coming in, and it looks like, I don't know, Gopher got to the mast boot or something, it's just shredded, and it was like, it's pretty obvious, but it doesn't hurt to look over these things. So we can go to the next slide, please. Basically, how to determine another indicator for your standing rigging. If you have adjusters that look like this, they're probably 30+ years old. So they use a bronze for the adjuster screws themselves. And when they look that green, yeah, they need to be replaced. Even if they look good on the outside, go to put them down. A lot of times they're too corroded in the turnbuckle themselves. And I've also seen these will actually narrow down. So I'll go to tune a boat. They don't want to change the rigging or replace it. I'll do a mast tune on it or rig tune on it. And when I go to tighten it up, it will start jumping threads because the threads have actually narrowed down in that area and have corroded away. So that's something to definitely keep an eye out for. When in doubt, just call somebody and come look at it.
Yes, do you have a comment on stay lock or Norseman fittings versus swages?
They're more expensive.
Yeah.
And that's about it. Yeah. I mean, they originally came out for the reason, if you're not familiar, it's a mechanical termination that you put on the end of a wire, as opposed to a big heavy piece of equipment crushing the metal sleeve. I don't have a great picture of it there, but it crushes the sleeve around the wire and basically pull welds it together. That's a swage, as opposed to a mechanical locking Norseman or stay lock fitting. We use the mechanical fittings quite a bit on furlers, where you have a set head stay, and depending on the furler, you might have to fish. If you want to reuse your furler and replace the head stay inside of it, a lot of times the screws won't come out because they're stainless screws and aluminum. It's a good choice. And then they run the new stay through the center of the extrusion, but you can't have any fitting or a big turnbuckle on the other end because it won't fit. So what they'll do is replace it with a bare wire. They'll swage usually one end at the top, and then they'll put a mechanical fitting down at the bottom. And that's how they'll replace the standing ring. So that's, in my opinion, that's what we typically use it for. But yeah, you can replace all of your own rigging if you buy the wire and buy all the fittings. However, do the math, because those fittings are very expensive. When you compare an eye, the cost of an eye to the swaged eye fitting as opposed to a mechanical fitting, you're looking at 5 times the cost per fitting. So it's quite pricey, which is why we typically won't use it when we have to. The sheaves, again, not shivs, but this is a masthead, which was a great photo opportunity because it didn't have a cover on it. This is kind of rare in a lot of boats, but you can see a good sheave here where the rope is nice and happy and over top of it in the center of it. And these just look like they've fallen off. Well, what's happened was the sheave itself has split in two right in the middle. And that's fallen off to one side. So obviously that's going to make it very hard to hoist any sails or put it on a winch. You're damaging the rope at that point as well. We can go to the next slide, please. Stainless into cast aluminum. It's not good. Get a lot of corrosion. That's that chalky white stuff. A lot of boats have it. It happens to everybody. And that's where Tef gel. Move up the pin with Tef gel. It's a great high load lubricant where you're going to have opposing forces or anything like that. Where you don't need high speed, but you do need high load. So that pin took quite a bit of heat, quite a bit of hammering to get out. And usually when we put it back together, this is probably original from 30 years ago. But I've seen Tef gel be used for 10+ years and the screw just comes right out. It's amazing. It's a great product. This is what not to do. If you're trying to figure out what's going on here, I'm still trying to figure it out. I was hard to put water boots on some of these boats. We've had the work done up here in the Annapolis area to do all new standing rigging. And then she moved it back to her original slip, which I think is on the tongue. And I came back to do the spreader boots and I took off the boot and I saw this. Basically what's happening here is That's, I don't know why, I
Wow.
can tell you what's going on, is that these swage fittings, there's a big hole. And that is supposed to go through the pin, it's going through there. And what they did, I still don't know why. But I was supposed to put spreader boots into a rig tune, and when I got to the boat, the turnbuckles were maxed out. I'm like, that's weird. So the other company must have made them way too long or something. I was like, I can't tune the rig. So I was like, well, I'll do the spreader boots while I'm here. Uncovered this mess, and I was like, well, that's why they're too long. So because they're adding distance here. So anytime you see something that looks a little off, it probably is off. So don't just ignore it. I don't know why they did this, but they put in like 1/4-inch shackles in here when this should have been gone through.
At least they moused it.
Yeah, they moused it. So yeah, when those 1/4-inch shackles go, that mousing one.
Probably
That'll keep you regular. Yeah. So that's horrendous. That's dangerous. You've now, less than probably at 30% of where the strength should be. So don't do that. Long story short. So I can go to the next one.
And the pins rusty.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What was the moral of that story? Did they have to get it fixed?
Yes. Yeah. We had to pull the rig. And the customer wasn't very happy with it because they just paid for new standing rigging. And I said, I'm sorry, there's no way I can fix this without. And the problem is we pulled the rig, got it down, I had it fixed in about 15 minutes and it went right back in. That was an expense that customer did not need. So,
Is the rigger still around?
yes. I'll leave it at that. Next slide, please. I just want to touch on this, especially if you're going offshore. Like I said, I've done a lot of offshore races. On a Newport 2 Bermuda race, first night, I'm off watching down below and everything cuts off electrically. There's many reasons why that could happen. We eventually found the problem, fixed it. But most of you will pull down electrical panel, or this was from the navigation plot, the chart plotter up on the helm. And trying to diagnose something when it looks like that is not good. So we go to the next slide. Cleaning it up, making it look a little better. It's a lot easier to see what the heck is going on, especially at 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that. So while you're trying to fix that, you're also going slower. It's distracting to everybody. People aren't getting the rest that they need. So make sure your boat's properly prepared for almost anything. Organization and preparation for a race like A2B is absolutely paramount. You can't overthink it. So, next slide, please. Little before and after there. So if you pull down a panel because the switch ain't working like the bilge pumps, well, you pull down, it's very difficult to see what the heck's going on. And there were multiple issues with that we were able to rectify and get a new panel in there. That's a heck of a lot easier to diagnose on the fly. So we go to the next one. More things, basically insurance requirements. And the last one is something new to me, but we'll cover them. The company requires most insurance companies will require some sort of a rider for 100 to 150 miles offshore. Anything more than that in additional insurance, like going to Bermuda. If you're doing coastal cruising, your policy will almost always cover what you have. Check. Isn't all that story. Look it up, talk to your insurance company, and a lot of insurance companies want you to have a rig inspection done the year that you plan on doing the race. So I always get panic phone calls, in May saying you cannot do a rig inspection. And it's really nice because I got nothing else going. It's like April 1st, one of those. If your rig is more than 10 years old, yeah, they're going to require it. This was the new one I just found out about maybe 2 days ago. One of my customers was trying to get insurance, and he said that they weren't going to insure the rig because of its age. Now, he had just put on new standing rigging, but the actual mast itself, they were giving some pushback on, and they wanted to replace the mast. So I was like, that's the first I've ever heard of that, where they wouldn't insure that. And also he brought up the point where he said, he gave him the name brand of the batteries. It was a Chinese made battery. And they said, we're not sharing that either. They wanted to replace the batteries with USA made batteries and have an ABYC tech install it. Yes.
How old was that mast?
Probably, I don't remember the exact age, but I think it's mid to late 80s. So it's up there, but it's not, it's fine. I don't understand it. So, but insurance companies are weird. But yeah, the battery one and being brand specific or origin specific was incredible. I've never seen that before. So call your insurance companies and sort that out before you get called with a, I got you moment, in June 1st or something like that. This is an example of the form that you will get for a rig inspection. This is about 7 pages. I just took a screenshot of the first one. And this color coding here works really well. I usually put a little description to talk about why it needs attention or replacement. So it's really easy to go through, fix the red ones, eventually get to the yellow ones, and then bring them up. So, anyways, again, check your pedal pins, make sure they're open. This was on a boat that's been sailed for quite some time, and they're not split. I mean, you can just grab them and take them out. That's kind of dangerous. And the problem with that is, yes, if you have 800 static load on one of your shrouds, yeah, the clevis pin isn't going to magically fall out. But if you don't, like if your rig is loose and it's heeled over, then you have slack in the shrouds, and then those can wiggle out, fall out. So definitely something to keep an eye on. These are the toggles that I was talking about earlier. They'll typically crack. I got some pictures later on, but they'll crack right up here where they fold over the T-joint. Any broken strands on any wires, I'm pretty sure people are familiar with replacing. And bare minimum, they should be replaced in pairs. If they're all the same vintage, the other ones are going to break too. So we usually will do them all and replace all the standing rigging at once. That's always what I recommend. There are very few circumstances, like if you hit a bridge, then you can kind of inspect everything and just replace the head stay, for example. But usually, because of the age issue, we just swap it all out at once. Again, they don't have to be crazy, just 20 degrees or so. The pin direction, these are all good because the front of the boat is that way. So I try to keep the cotter pins and the close pins, all the ends of them facing aft, so that your sail is not dragging over the top of it for whatever reason, or you get a jig sheet will snag on it, just helps prevent snags. Again, I try not to tape them if I can avoid it. Next slide, please. This is the top left photo. Obviously, that's a crack squirter end. Wasn't caught initially. I was brought into that project after the mast was down and work started. And they missed it. They painted it. So we had to grind that out, and I kept grinding out more and more and more. And there was less than 0.5 millimeter hole in that little tab on. It was amazing. So I basically had to kind of piece it back together and re-weld it and grind it all out and reshape it. But got to paint it back up, and the mast is happy up now. This is an example of a chain plate that obviously is cracked right there at the weld. The problem is that once it cracks, you end up with crevice corrosion inside of that, and the crack is still going and growing every year, every time you go sailing. And that gentleman had an issue with getting insurance. The marina he was at wanted an updated insurance policy, and the insurance company did not want to give him that without a rig inspection. So I did a rig inspection and said, you got broken chain plates, you got to take the rig down and try to change the standing rig. And so he's trying to work that out. It's going to probably end up losing the slope marina for it. This was another standing rigging job where we took the furler apart. You have to take the bottom part to get to your turnbuckle and all that to swap out the cable inside of it. And this was a crack that was very hard to see because there was a clamshell over top of this whole thing. And it was kind of a hairline crack that opened up after we picked it up and kind of, put a little tension on it. And we were able to fix that, but that's another great example of crevice corrosion. Stainless being right up against even anodized aluminum. Time will take back whatever it wants. So we were able to just lop that off essentially, and then put tuck gel the whole thing and slide it up. Luckily, the furler was very long, and we could lose 6 inches or so. I'll do it for that one. Next slide, please. There's a certain J110 that had a good check filler. And there's another really good example of cast aluminum piece with a bolt through it. I finished up Annapolis down to Hampton for a down the bay race. Got in a car, came back up, and by the time I got to my car, I checked my phone, there was a text message saying, this is only 1 week before, Annapolis to Bermuda. So I checked my phone and they said, we need our gooseneck failed, you know, can we fix it in time? So I came back, obviously you can see significant corrosion and couldn't hardly tell at all that there was a crack there in the first place. But it did let go and there was all that was on the inside. I didn't. So went to McMaster car, bought a chunk of aluminum and then spent way too long grinding and shaping it and drilling holes in it, but got them back and they were able to do the race. So from what I hear, it was pretty fun. So another things to look out for during sort of a once over of your own rig inspection. This is where you're typically going to find failure points on standing rigging. If you have broken strands, they are going to be hard to see. I get asked is like, well, can we send up a drone or something and take pictures from that? I would say good luck. I was like, no, you got to get your face right in there to see that kind of detail and get the photos and the angle that you want. This is a great example of a significant crack down at the bottom. So if you see rust anywhere, take it pretty serious. This is a crack, a longitudinal crack on the swage fitting itself. It's pretty rare, but on very old boats, you know, 30 or 40 years old, yeah, you start to see that. You know, it's another example of a crack on the swage there. Next one.
Do you with the swages and water getting in there and winter coming, you just hope it doesn't freeze and roll the dice,
Yeah,
put something in there to prevent the water from getting in the dry?
there was for a period of time, folks were for the mechanical fittings themselves, putting like 5200 or 4200, some sort of caulking inside of the fitting when they put it together. It just makes it harder to take apart. If water can get into those mechanical fittings, then they can usually get out. And I don't really worry about the water getting in there because they'll still last 20 years. Yeah. You know, it's not a big deal. For swage fittings, pretty much, I don't know anybody who puts any sort of sealant inside of the swage. So yeah, we don't really worry about it. If you cut that swage, it's going to look like a solid rod. You won't see strands, you won't see air pockets. It forms everything, it crimps it down, basically mechanically and cold welded together. So if you cut that swage in half, you will not see the strands at all. That's a really good example of chain plate. Now, I guarantee you there were warning signs that people could walk by and they hit with the hose. They're like, that doesn't look good. And they went on with it. Yeah, now it really doesn't look good. So, that's a better example there of a small, very small crack on top of. Again, they're usually in the forming process when they make those, they're basically stamped out, or even if it boards, they still have to be bent over top of that in that shape. So that's a stress area. And then this is a chain plate, which I guarantee you did not look like this before they took it out, cleaned it up, took a photo. But the point being is some of those cracks can be very hard to see. Same picture. Anyway, this guy had a little docking incident, didn't know about it. And this is a very small boat, maybe a 24 footer or something like that. But basically the swage here on the bottom stud has been bent. If you have any bent studs, even on lifelines, you know, they should be replaced, honestly. They're machined and tested when they're new. They're not tested after you hit a dock. Yeah, don't take a chance with it. Okay, excellent. Everybody has asked me about going up and how I do it. My kit is out on the table if you want to take a look or ask any questions. I use a climbing harness. This obviously is a bosun's chair. I go up by myself. I feel safer that way because there are plenty of stories where people had incidents, especially one pretty bad one was people got a little wrapped up with an electric winch that shorted out. And it kept it on, and both of the individuals, one of them passed away, the guy at the top, and then the other person got tangled up in it and had a panic moment, and it was, yeah, she got pretty messed up too. So I still use saying that I still use electric winch to get up if it's available, because it is awesome. And it saves me a whole lot of work. But there are plenty of other ways to get up and down. They have steps, little fabric stairs, the 18 mast climbers. There's a typical bosun chair, and you can grind somebody up on it. If anybody's had to grind anybody up on a winch, that dead weight is extremely heavy and it's hard and slow. So if you are the one being taken up, try to climb. You know, use your hands and feet and everything, and help the guy out down on the bottom. If you want to do it yourself, there's a couple ways you can do it. These chairs here work great for at the dock. If you're doing an offshore race and you have to go up to fix something, a climbing harness is what you want, because no matter which way you go, you're not going to fall out. These tend to be way more comfortable, but they're not quite as secure because they don't expect you to be inverted in this. And there's more detail on types of rope and ascenders to use. Minimize sort of your trips up and down. Obviously, plan it out in your head. If you can have somebody there, it definitely helps. So, any questions on that? Going up on rings?
Do you use ascenders?
I do, yes. I have one hand ascender with foot loops in it. So your legs are way stronger than anything else. So help yourself up with that. And then I have what we call a free, which is basically a leg device that I kind of pull through. So I get a little kind of a 2-to-1 purchase on that for the tanning hands as I'm climbing up. And then to get back down, I can open the locking mechanism and sort of propel down much faster. Next slide. Any questions at all?
Yes. What is the purpose of a baby stay?
Basically to induce, to add additional support to the mast. The baby stay pulls on the lower portion of the mast, usually against 2 lower shrouds on the back, and kind of triangulates that, and to induce some bend in the mast. So a lot of people, especially Benetos, will have a baby stay on them, and a lot of folks remove them and I say it's not needed. I seriously doubt Beneto will put it on if it's not needed, but all I can say is there are a lot of people remove them and masts have not come down. So I'm not a rig designer, so that one I can't answer. But yeah, I've been on boats that have them and that don't have them, and then have them removed, and I've been asked to remove them. And I said, well, it's in your hands at that point. So, but yeah, I haven't seen them ask them down because this is the big step. Yes.
When would you use a cotter ring instead of a cotter pin?
When you're trying to remove it easily. Yeah, the cotter pins are way more secure. Yeah, way more secure. The problem with the rings that you run into, especially along and on like a head stay pin at the very top of the mast, I would never use a ring being slip ring or because the pliers running right next to it, the jig pipe up and down. If that thing ever snags a strand on it, you're going to yank on that thing and straighten it right out, and then yeah. So usually for standing rigging, I don't use any split rings, or unless they're requested by the customer.
You said you wouldn't take over a cotter pin unless you had to. So when you have to.
When it's too long. And it's already in there, like for a race, like if you're going, doing the Bermuda race, a lot of people will tape up everything. I think that's fine. You're gonna tape it for a week. Don't tape it for 3 years. That's bad news. So get to Bermuda, take it all off, hose down the boat, and then when you go to deliver the boat back, you can take it right back up again. And then make sure your delivery crew knows. Yeah. And let it breathe. Any questions about line selection or hires? I know Kristen talked about it a little bit. Yes.
2-to-1 hires on main.
Mhm.
What's the advantages and disadvantages?
It's a little bit of a hard concept to grasp unless you have sort of a mechanical engineering background, but it does reduce the compression loads on the mast. So that's a big thing, especially on higher end carbon fiber masts. And the other big benefit to that, if you have a big square top main, that's a huge benefit in getting it up like a Par 400 or a Class 40 or something like that.
Will it change like the bend characteristics of the mast at all?
No, The hired itself will give way more than the standing rigging will. Unless your standing rigging is incredibly slack. And then you got a ton of hired on, which I don't know why you would have that scenario. Like I do run into that actually, going downwind. If you like on a J80 and it's blowing 20 knots or something like that. And the rig's tuned and you're going upwind. The problem is you end up with, rake and prevent, so the mast is leaning back and you put up the big kite and the mast all of a sudden rakes forward. So then you get slack in the headstay. And if it's 20 plus, use it as a little staysail going downwind. And the higher tension then is what's holding up the rig. Higher tension is tighter than what your rig tension was because the rig's slack now. So it kind of rotates on that.
So I sail with dinghy sailors and they always want to rake the mast forward downwind, and I'm skeptical of the benefits of that on a 38-foot boat.
Yeah. I agree. I am also skeptical. Yeah, for finer tune, finer trim sailing, what do you got? They have what they call a fracculator. It's a made-up word for a little pennant that people do, and they take the jib down and hook it onto the jib hired, and then they crank the jib hired to pull the mast forward. I don't see that being a great benefit, and people are doing it in like 15 to 20 knots of breeze, and I'm like, I have no idea. It's like you have this literally over 1,000 square feet of sail pulling the mast forward. How much more do you want to go? And I don't see the big benefit with that. There are a lot of things like I've had to repair a Vang a couple times because it's a 42-foot boat, and it's not a lightweight boat, and they're Vang sheeting on it. That works great. Vang sheeting is awesome for a small boat that doesn't have a traveler. If you have a traveler, stop Vang sheeting. And people still do it. They do it on Benetos, 36.7. They're one design fleet. That boat is too big to have that very small amount of purchase. When you have all the leverage on the back of that lower arm, you're tripling the loads on it and trying to get the Vang to do something it was never intended to do, which is flatten out the main and go up on it. So there's other controls that are designed and engineered for that kind of load. And Vang's not it. So there are a lot of things you see done on boats that are sort of leftovers from trying to fix things that weren't properly engineered from the get-go. So just be very, very cautious on it. Yes.
I have kind of an oddball question, but what are your thoughts on synthetic rigging, but also keeping in mind that the SERs don't even allow Dyneema lifelines?
Yeah. I would not do synthetic rigging. There are very few instances where it's beneficial. The problem is Dyneema has like a Spectra. Spectra covers all, but it is the actual material. Dyneema is the name brand, just in case you see some other off brand that says Spectra and it's, I didn't see whatever it is. That is, Dyneema is just a name brand. But for that type of rigging, you have to size it up so much. So it becomes expensive. You add windage and it still stretches more than wire does. So they did have problems with the temperature changes as well for big offshore boats when it first came out. There's a huge trimaran that was headed down the Caribbean, and they were doing a race from north to south. It's cold in the north, warm in the south. It has inverse properties to expansion and contraction. So when it's hot out, it contracts, which is bad when you set your rig tension in the winter time at the beginning of the year when it's 60 out, and then it's 90 degrees in the summertime. Your rigging just got tighter and you didn't touch it. So that's weird. So they used it for a race boat that was heading north to south, and by the time they got down, they had to fly 2 riggers down there to reach in the rig after the race. Anyway, there are great uses of Dyneema. I'm actually a big fan of Dyneema lifelines. The reason they got rid of it initially and said no to the offshore rigs was because of a 100-foot maxi sailboat, which was called Comanche originally. They had Dyneema lifelines, and they were basically smoking out one of their sheets that was on one of the big code 0 sails, and they're going through a jog, and that rubbed on it, and it shaped through the outer chase of the Dyneema. I'm pretty sure, does anybody in here have a carbon sled that's 100 feet long? I have a problem with them setting up rules for that scenario and applying it to everybody who just wants to have a great time going to Bermuda. So So I mean, it's a great material. It was fantastic. It's taking over in places, and Vectran and Technora and Kevlar. You hardly ever see, nobody makes Kevlar hires anymore. But it is fantastic, for hires. That's better flex fatigue than Vectran, and better UV stabilization. But people have to be aware that in my opinion, buy name brand or don't go online and find the cheapest Dynamin perspective that you can find, because it is not the same. If you have to dig in and look really hard to find stretch numbers, percentages of load and how much it stretches, then it shouldn't be. It should be advertised up front. So. Any other questions? Yes.
What about like name brand standard?
That's not as critical. I use Hain products, Hain Marine. They're fantastic. C.S. Johnson, been doing it for a long time. It's another one. Obviously, Stay-Lot and Norseman for your. So the wire itself, most cases, most breakers in this area are Korean manufactured, which it is what it is. You can't find. It's really difficult to find standing rigging made here in the States. Or as far as cable goes, that can compete at any price point. Now there are Chinese manufacturing that you stay away from, but the Korean stuff seems to be fine. Outs, wire rope is where most people are getting their stuff on.
Hey, Mike. Hey, Mike, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, how about Dyneema for running backstays? Would that be a good use?
Yes. I'm actually doing some check stay. I've done check stays, running backstays, permanently mounted, fixed center backstays. But the Dyneema that you choose, just make sure you usually want at least a 2-to-1 safety factor if you're going to swap it out. Talking to cheaper no-name brands that you might find online to buy the stuff from, they may or may not have a UV coating on it, and Dyneema is great. If it has a UV coating on it. If it doesn't, then you're losing almost 50% of the braking strength in 6 months. That's how fast the UV will tear it out. Yes.
For what it's worth, we changed our Dyneema backstay right before the Bermuda race last year. And during the course of the race, it stretched enough that we had to take all the purchase out and just lash it to the chain plate in the back.
Yeah.
And after that race, it was properly stretched. But
Yeah. Yes, that's a very good point. There's a whole bunch of, about 3 different ways it can stretch. One is actual stretch where it stretches and then goes back.
Creep.
Yeah, and there's creep, which is a permanent elongation, and it will not go back. And then there's constructional stretch, which is basically if you splice a line, the fibers are baggy, they're not tightly compressed. So that's constructional stretch. You can get that out, by putting it in your garage or something, and putting a load on it pretty easily.
And this was heat set line too.
Yeah.
So even
Yeah,
then,
that's impressive.
So one of the Zoom participants is asking about what about replacing rod and what manufacturer?
Navtech, there's Nitronic rod. They were bought out. Right now, Hain does make it. So I would recommend going to them. Now the problem is they don't sell directly to the consumer, so we will have to go through a dealer. I also was asked in previous seminars if it was worth changing, either going to synthetic rigging or going from wire to rod or rod to wire. It's usually not worth the expense for the performance upgrade unless you're trying to set the world on fire or something like that, and it's a pretty prototype build or something pretty much right. So anything else?
No. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's take another bio break and be back here in less than 10 minutes, hopefully.
If people didn't get a raffle ticket, I can give you one out.
Yeah, we'll do the raffle when we come in before we start with Derek.
That's all right. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw plenty of coffee out there. All right. I don't know if it's open, and I think that back deck has a water fountain. I think.
Yeah, I think, well,
But I don't know if they have it.
Yeah.
Wait for the winter. You know, a long internet.
Yeah.
Tell you what, if you give that to Derek.
It is.
That's why we didn't do it there. We didn't.
Well, I liked it, you know, having, so I switched it, but I wasn't able to see the chat while I was presenting.
Yeah, right.
So,
Yeah, they will typically run higher loads on the sweat.
who's the next presenter?
Derek here.
Okay, hi.
Hey, Julian, how are
you doing?
you get that text from Debbie about flight?
Yeah.
It did. Has the boat been found?
I don't know. I know I did the survey when they bought it.
This is the one that you were just telling me about.
I saw the Facebook, so I didn't talk to Debbie about it. but
Okay, yeah.
She's,
I mean, just.
yeah.
So certainly, I mean, it's only like 60 miles off of whatever.
What was the reason that they abandoned?
I don't know, but it was rough weather and he was by himself, so he probably just got beat the shit and.
The boat's gonna turn up perfectly fine.
Oh, yeah, no, somebody would have run out and towed it in and.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's a shame.
Now, do you have a clicker?
Me.
She's gonna be.
Oh, okay.
I'm your clicker. Did you figure out how to be able to see the chat while presenting? Because I see up there that there's the chat. I didn't want to mess with it too much while them.
Yeah.
So I can see those people.
Yeah, a lot of them.
So I think I did a swap presenter and swap, but then that shows up here.
We'll give you a higher screen method where you'll mark all on the extrusion itself or from the basically you speak as they were down.
Yeah.
The presentation, but I can see the notification chat was up here,
Right, well,
but I couldn't access that because it was
right.
kind of swapped on it.
Honestly, I think if people just want to unmute themselves and ask the question, then there's only six people here, so
Oh,
yeah.
So you got some virtual.
Yeah, there we've got 5.
Yeah.
So, yeah, all right. So you're speaking.
So they're just seeing the presentation, they're not seeing a video.
Correct. Right. That's, yeah, it was
Do I need?
we had the camera here and
Do I need to?
I think.
Do I need a mic?
No, no, it's picking you up right now, actually, as we speak. Yeah. And I think it's coming in through the camera here.
Okay.
So.
They charge extra for them.
Well, if we just did it on the camera, they could see you and they could see a big white blob on the screen, but yeah, so this is probably easier.
Yeah, over at, do you know where ABYC is? The old FAR building?
Yeah.
They turned the 3rd floor into an education center.
Right, yeah.
And
Send out some of their Zoom presentations. So it's should be.
well, they've actually done sometimes for some of the stuff, they set it up as like a TV.
Oh, wow.
And it's, I mean, really well done.
Oh,
So they, yeah.
yeah, I mean, we're trying to get a stuff together here.
Well, fortunately, they have a guy on staff who's
Yeah.
like just really good with it.
Helps when you have it. Yeah. Hey, before we.
Talked about it.
Be that later.
Yeah.
Yeah, we might as well.
All right, we got a bunch of stuff to give away here. We've got some shirts, we've got some dry bags and hats and mugs. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to call your number and come on up and pick what you want. All right. So 153.
Thanks.
151.
Roger, he's not here. He'll be back.
And honestly, you just get everybody.
149.
Yeah.
143.
They're close. Everyone get the things.
Okay. Sure. Yeah.
No, I made my first one. It's not.
Probably just said.
Right.
All right. Cool, sir.
Yeah. 147.
That's good.
Yeah, probably.
Yep. A2B.
144.
Yeah, right.
What's that one?
Yeah. And then 2 weeks later, we drove this out of that house right out there. Yeah.
Yep. Take your pick.
Okay. 142.
Yes.
Your number came up.
150.
You're welcome. Didn't want you to miss out. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
139.
Big winner.
All right. Sounds like that one.
Hold up. We should.
All right then. Right then.
Actually, they're going to have us.
What
What do you get?
148.
Another one.
I'll think of this one.
137. 152.
Sure.
Best insured. One, 138. One, 140. There you go.
Yay.
And 136. You got your choice to have. Okay, all right. And for one hat, 146. Tell you what.
I have a couple, but I think they keep them in. They're like medium.
This really is.
like,
145.
Nice sell up there, but we got a big.
Thank you all. All right. Let's get the road on the show. A quick introduction to Derek. He's been screwing around on boats for a lot longer than most of us have. We just had a lovely chat outside before this. He's going to, let's see, he's going to tell you how to keep everything connected. So we had the first guy who dealt with all the stuff that moved, the second guy that did all the stuff that didn't move. Now you're going to tie it all together. Sound about right? Yeah, I know, but all right. So take it away, Derek.
Sure. Yeah, I understand there's some people online, so hopefully they can hear me. If they cannot, let me know. Getting on a small boat, and these are relatively we own and sail, and going out in the ocean, it's somewhat of a daunting thing. When you cross that line of demarcation out, between the Cape of the two capes, and head out into the ocean, I really hope you get a little weird feeling of uneasiness and stuff, because you should. It keeps you on your toes. But the reality is, the boats generally do fine. It's the people we tend to worry about. But there are things that can happen with the boats, and you've got over a year to get your boats ready for the race. And it takes a lot of time, to go through, identify what needs doing, and then take care of stuff.
Working here. Hold on a second. Yeah.
Freeze button on the projector.
It's weird. It's showing in advance. It's advanced here.
Yes. Oh, we're doing that. Is everybody here thinking about the race or planning to do the race or whatever? I know Julianne's boat does not have a deep draft bend keel. Are there any full keel boats or anything like that, or is everybody mostly modern? Semi-full. What kind of boat?
Gothic.
Okay. Yeah. 36. Or,
like I said, it's a tough one. It'll get there.
Yeah, so some of the stuff I'll share with you, yeah, you know, I'm a boat surveyor and yesterday I did a pre-purchase survey on a 39-foot French-made 30-something-year-old boat. And there's really nothing good about this boat. I mean, the refrigeration worked. The turbocharger was seized, it was corroded and seized and everything else. I mean, it's just not good. And
There we go, yeah.
you know, I got home and I walked into my house and I could smell the boat on me. That's how bad, and it wasn't one smell, it was a combination smell. I had a diesel leak, it had stinky sanitation systems, really gross bilges and everything else. It was just a combination. I just had to, strip down and throw my clothes in the wash.
Is the buyer gonna buy it or not?
I really hope not, because they have no idea. They can't do anything themselves. And this, this boat, if you look at a 40-foot sailboat, a replacement, a new one, French made or whatever, is between $300,000 and $400,000. And a quick little formula for those of you thinking about buying boats is a boat that needs a refit. It's generally going to need a minimum of 10% of that replacement cost, but potentially up to 20% or more of that replacement cost put into it. So if you're like, oh, I can buy this 40-foot boat for $30,000, well, you need the other 50, 60,000 bucks to put into it after you buy it. I try to have polite conversations, and my job is not to dash people's dreams. So with race boats, and this is the old airmail who raced around Annapolis for a long time. And Julianne was a fixture on the boat. And racing sailors tend to focus on things that make the boats go fast. Well, that's their primary focus: sails, rigging, crew, deck hardware, and all that. But they're not necessarily focused on the engines and electrical systems and the plumbing and stuff. I've been on boats that have caught fire and have started to sink and everything else, all for one of a lack of maintenance. Right? And Julian, I'll apologize. I put it so that stuff fades in. So go ahead and get the next slide. So things that'll ruin your day: engine and transmission failure. When your engine stops working, you're in big trouble. You can't motor anywhere, but you also don't have a means of generating electricity, and your batteries will wear down. Next. And by the way, your transmission is equally as important. Your engine might run, so you can charge your batteries, but you can't motor the vessel. Steering failure, obviously. In fact, airmail on an Annapolis Bermuda trip, half their rudder broke off halfway to Bermuda when they had to turn around and come back. Fortunately, they were able to still steer the boat with what they had. Electrical problems. Boats are getting really more and more complex, and the more complex they are, the more potential for problems there. Broken toilet, that's obvious. No one wants to use a bucket and 8-foot seas. Deck leaks. If you've ever tried to sleep on a boat and you've had a drip on your head or something like that, and it's just about the most annoying thing to ever experience. That's any kind of leaks coming in through the ocean. They might be minor, or they might be really not minor. And you don't want any. Even some people are like, oh, it's just a drip or a trickle or something like that, and the bilge pump runs once every 4 hours or something. That's not good. Next. And obviously rigging failure. Nobody wants that, and hopefully the fellow is just here educate you all about that. And fire. When you're on a small boat going out in the ocean, people do all sorts of things to plan to, have to abandon the boat and get in a life raft or do whatever. Usually when a boat sinks, it takes a half hour or more. When you have a fire, you literally have maybe a couple minutes, literally 1 or 2 minutes. to put the fire out. If you can't put that fire out, you have to get off that boat as soon as possible. It burned, fiberglass boats burn incredibly hot, and the fumes are deadly toxic. And once it gets going, it spreads fast, really, really fast. Boats are made with polyester resin, which is a petroleum product. Next. Things to look for on deck, loose stanchions, handrails, biminies, dodger frames. Go give stuff a good hard shake. You got to think about this boat sailing on its side, and 25 knots of breeze, and you got to walk around the decks and the amount of load. I mean, give them a good hard shake. But I was on yesterday, going around, walking around the decks. One of the stanchions just pulled right out of his pocket. But you can't tell by looking at it. I had to literally pull on it. Lifelines and your race regulations are specific about what kind of lifelines you can use. But take a look at them. Any sharp or broken fittings on deck or down below, those are personal injury hazards. Getting a really bad laceration while you're out in the ocean. It's one thing if you're here on land, you go to the emergency room or clinic or whatever, get your stitches, but you don't have to deal with that offshore. Next. Clogged drains, especially like the anchor locker well, if you have a foredeck anchor locker. I sense something's happening. You don't want to be trying to race with an extra 200 pounds in your
200.
Next. Again, leaking hatches, windows, port lights. That if you have a leak, find it and fix it. Worn or ineffective non-skid, and again, you want, when you're walking the decks, boat heeled over 25 degrees or whatever, you want secure footing. If your non-skid is worn, it's time to get it renewed. Be it a Kiwi grip or have a professional painter paint on new non-skid or whatever. And make sure your ground tackle secured. I know typically in racing offshore, anchors get stowed away somewhere other than the bow, but wherever it is, just make sure it's secured. If it's on the bow, make sure it's tied on really well. On lifelines, split ring fasteners, everybody uses them, but they're really prone to getting snagged by sails, sheets, whatever, and they get snagged and they get yanked out. And you don't know. I mean, I can't tell you how many boats I've been on where there are clevis pins in place, but the split ring fastener's been yanked out, and it's just waiting to fall out, and you lose your lifeline. Steering systems, cable tension should be snug, but not overly tight. The boat I was on yesterday, the steering cables were just as tight as could be, and you could barely turn the wheel. It just wasn't good. And again, take a close look at your steering cables. You can run your hand on them, or use a Kleenex or something like that to see if you have any meat hooks, whatever. And also look for corrosion. You see any brown looks like little brown bubbles coming out of the wire, that's a bad sign. Stainless steel does corrode over time in a saltwater environment. And you should be able to turn the steering wheel stop to stop, and it should hit the stops, and there shouldn't be any play or whatever. So definitely check your stops. And rudder post glands. Rudder post glands are hard to get to on a lot of boats, and they don't get any love. I'll get on a 30-year-old boat, and it's never been adjusted or anything like that. Some boats don't have an actual gland. The fiberglass tube for the rudder post comes up way high, sometimes all the way to the underside of the deck. So that's not an issue. But if you have a bronze stuffing box for your rudder post tube, get in there, and if it has signs, at the dock, it may not be leaking, but when you're sailing or motoring, it probably is leaking. Get in there and take a look. And if it has signs that it's been leaking, it's time to tighten it up or service it. And an emergency tiller, yeah, and I'm sure this is all part of what you do. You want to get out and you want to not just fit it, but you want to try using it. They're not easy to use, most of them. In fact, they're painful to use. They're just not And you gotta think about the conditions where you're gonna need to use an emergency tiller. Is not typically not benign conditions like you have dockside, but rough weather. And here's a steering cable. Down here at the bottom, you can see there's that's on a J boat, and they have a unique seal, which is kind of scary on some boats like this. You'll see a fabric gator, a little enclosure around there. They, if it does leak, it can. And fit your emergency tiller. You can see the tiller is not slid all the way down over the bolt that it's supposed to be. So you want to know that. So if it needs adjustment or something like that, you want to learn about it now, not 200 miles out there. Engines, again, it's a good idea to have a mechanic over your engine, no matter how good you are with engines and stuff. They're professionals. Some people look at that and they're like, well, it works and stuff, but if this exhaust elbow fails up here and starts, putting out 700-degree exhaust gases into your engine compartment, especially if it blows on a fuel hose or something like that, it will cause a fire. Mechanical problems are due to lack of maintenance for the most part. Seawater pumps, belts, hoses, oil, fuel, coolant leaks, you name it. Valve propellers, if you got barnacles on your propeller, it's really going to affect the performance of a small engine. And when things are out of sight and out of mind, you're not thinking about it. And but those are the things really to worry about. 1 year before Airmail was getting ready to do one of the offshore races, I went through the boat for the owner, and the exhaust elbow was cracked and had been spraying seawater all over the engine for I don't know how long, and it was just tons of rust all over everything. It's like, you can't, you got to replace this. And it's like, and one on his radar. Thanks. Before going out to sea, just go ahead and go through them all. Change oil in spring. Transmission fluid. Pay attention to your transmission. Check your transmission fluid on a regular basis, monthly or whatever. There's no alarm to tell you when you develop a transmission fluid leak, and if you run it and the fluid gets low, you burn up the clutch packs. A clean engine. Keep your engine clean. Simple green. Use simple green. Spray it down. Wipe it underneath. Put the white drip pads, diapers, whatever you want to call them, oil pads under the engine, so that if you have a leak, you'll see it on the drip pad. Always replace your seawater impeller before doing any big trip. I don't care if you replaced it last year. Put a new one in. You might end up with a drawer full of perfectly fine impellers, but you don't have to worry about it failing. I did deal with that I was doing a delivery back from Bermuda, and wasn't very fun. Again, hoses and belts. And replace all your fuel filters. Your fuel filters on a diesel engine, it's a two-part filtration system. You have your primary filter, which is usually 10 microns or 30 microns. And then you have your secondary filter, which is on the engine, which is 2 micron. It's a two-stage filtration. So you want to make sure and the reason I mention that is I see it all the time where people change their primary filters, but not the secondary filters. And if you smell diesel or coolant, you have a leak. They're closed systems. You should never smell diesel or coolant, at the engine. And if you have a leak, find it and fix it. Exhaust elbows, they're good for around 10 years. I've seen them go much longer than that, but you're really on borrowed time, and they never fail at a convenient time. That's an early warning sign. They fail from the inside out. So it's, corroding, it's corroded through the cast iron and starting to trickle. But what happens next is it just blows a big chunk out to the side of elbow, the mixing elbow, and then you cannot run your engine. It's time to call a mechanic. Anything to do with the fuel injection pump, don't even think about it. Engine and shaft alignment. There's some boat owners that are decent with that kind of stuff, but it's not easy, and it's a practice skill. If you have any kind of significant vibration is bad. Small diesel engines, they're not smooth, but if you have anything more than they should have, it's eventually going to cause problems. It'll ruin the seal coming out of the transmission, and then you develop a transmission fluid and stuff. Smoke in the exhaust, I don't care what color it is. It's one thing to have a little bit of white mist coming out, especially in cool time of year, which is just condensation when you have the warm exhaust gases hitting the cooler air. But if you have anything more than that, you need to, and it could be injectors needing to be reconditioned. If the engine's difficult to start, that's a problem. You don't want to be out in the middle of the ocean and you can't start your engine. I've been in the middle of the ocean and couldn't start the engine. And if an engine, let's say you lose your impeller and you replace the impeller and the engine's overheating, then you need to get a mechanic on board. Typically at that point, you need to back flush the cooling system or something like that. But there's something going on there that usually is going to take some professional help. Fuel systems, again, replace your fuel filters every year. Before you go on an offshore trip, if you haven't done it in the past few years, it's a good idea to have your tank cleaned. Either do it yourself if you're so inclined, or have a professional come and do that. You get sediment, diesel fuel gets sediment in the bottom of the tanks. And here on the Chesapeake Bay, it may be just fine, but you get out in the ocean and you're sailing around and all that sediment gets shaken up, and then you go to start your engine, it runs for a couple minutes, and then the filter clogs and the engine shuts down. And you see it all the time, but you're not supposed to install a rubber squeeze ball for priming the fuel filters. The rubber squeeze balls are not anything in an engine compartment has to be able to pass a certain fire test, and those rubber squeeze balls don't pass that fire test. Next. Propane. I assume most of the boats here have propane for cooking and or heating. Propane tanks need to be secure in their lockers. They need to have a remotely operated shutoff valve. And most of them do. You need a pressure gauge, and the function of the pressure gauge is not to tell you how much fuel you have in the tank. It's a liquid fuel, so you measure its volume by weight. The pressure gauge is there just to do a system integrity check. Essentially, you energize the solenoid, you open the valve on the tank, and then you close the valve on the tank, and you look at the pressure gauge. If it says 100 psi, you come back 5 minutes later, and it should still say 100 psi. If it does not, if it's dropped, you have a leak somewhere in the system. And I say 100 psi, could be 80 or whatever, but the only function of that gauge is just to do that safety check.
What if it falls a little bit in an hour?
Oh no, that's fine. Yeah. No, it just over 5 minutes is fine. And if you have corroded tanks, so I'm talking specifically steel tanks, it's time to get new tanks. And again, you want to test your system on a regular basis to make sure you don't have a leak. The boat I was on yesterday, it's gone 33 years and no one's ever put a pressure gauge on it. Even though it's a pretty hard requirement. And if you smell propane, just like with diesel fuel or whatever, you have a leak and you just need not to use a system until you fix the problem. And there's a typical propane locker installation. And if some people have propane grills, and okay, maybe for the race, you may not be taking your propane grill with you, but if you have the little 1 pound tanks, do not store those in your cabin or any other locker on the boat. Keep them in the propane locker because they will develop leaks. And if you want to scare the crap out of yourself, there's a British magazine called Yachting Monthly. where they did for funsies, they took a 39-foot boat, probably a sister ship to the boat I was on yesterday. And somebody had donated it to the magazine to do bad kind of testing, dismasting and all that. And their last hurrah was they took 2 1-pound tanks, just like you see here, and opened up, remotely opened them up and then ignited them, and it blew the deck off the boat. And the pressure, the force inside the boat would have killed anybody in there if they've been inside. So you have to take those things equally seriously. Electrical systems, if you're not good with electric systems yourself, and there are some people who are very good, but you want to make sure you have a good marine electrician. Marine electric systems, just right over by the chart house is they're a top shop. You want your wires to be neat, bundled, well secured, well above normal bilge water accumulations. Boat I was on yesterday, he just had wire bundles running through the bilges, and red wires had turned black and stuff like that, which is not good. You only want to use crimped wire connections. You never want to see wire-to-wire twist splice or wire nuts or anything like that. Any exposed energized terminals, be it AC or DC, need to be covered. Fuser circuit breakers at the source of power, not at the appliance or whatever, but at the source of power. And chafe protection, right, obviously. And chafe protections really comes into play around engines. Look at your engine, positive cable going to the starter. Is that cable exposed to chafe at a motor mount or something like that, which I see all the time? And if that chafes through, there's no fuse on that cable, and that will catch fire and burn your boat up. So, you see stuff like this in a locker where you're putting other stuff. That's kind of scary. Those are exposed DC positive terminals, so you definitely want covers. Your DC electric systems are your biggest source of fire on boats. Make sure batteries are secure, especially going out in the ocean. And the standard says no more than 1 inch movement in any direction. I don't want to see, for a boat going out in the ocean, I don't want my batteries moving around at all. So, make sure they're very secure, and straps need to be good straps, not, there's some really cheap straps with the plastic buckles and stuff like that. I don't trust those things for offshore use. And yeah, the positive positive terminals need to be covered. And you want to, with more and more stuff that you add to your boat, you're like, I'll see, people attach the positive wires straight to the batteries or whatever, to the engine starter, essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul. At some point, you don't want to just junk up your batteries and stuff. At some point, you may need to install a separate fuse panel or circuit breaker panel or something like that for all your extra goodies. Again, use only crimped terminals, ring terminals, butt splices. Hoses, take a close, make sure you use a strong flashlight. Go look at all your hoses. Look for any signs of cracking in the outer jackets on the hoses. You see it, it's time for new hoses. Seacocks need service, exercise them regularly. You can lubricate them with waterproof grease. And never use gate valves. Seawater hoses are not required to be double clamped. ABYC, American Boat and Yacht Council, does not require that. It's a good idea as long as you can as long as the 2 clamps are over the pipe, fully over the pipe. And I'll show you a picture here shortly. Hose clamps need to be marine quality, fully stainless steel. And bilge pump float switches, they fail without notice. So get in there and check them, lift it up. If you have a deep sump bilge, I have one of these extendable magnets because I drop things where I can't reach, and reach in there and just lift up the float switch, make sure it's working. do that on as often as possible. That's a gate valve. If you don't know what a gate valve is, and you should never see one of those on a boat. Two hose clamps are not always better than one. You can see a second hose clamp is above the pipe. And it's just squeezing on the hose. You'll damage the hose. This is a ball valve, which are entirely common on boats. But they're not ideal. They're adapted by our industry instead of being made for our industry. And the pipe fitting coming through the hull is straight thread, and those ball valves are tapered thread. And so you're putting a tapered thread onto a straight thread, and you get about 2.5 turns, and that's it. It'll work, but it's not ideal. This is a proper, purpose-made seacock, and it has a flange base that mates down against the hull. This is on a propeller shaft stuffing box hose. And this hose clamp that's broken looks just like this hose clamp when it's rotated around. This was on the underside. So, and you can't see that. So if you see, and you can either use a mirror or whatever to get under there and take a look. But look at all your hose clamps. If you see rust staining on hose clamps, you want to replace them. Again, check your bilge pumps. On the boat yesterday, it was an automatic bilge pump. The automatic function didn't work, but I turned on used the manual switch, and the pump came on. Nothing happened. No water went out. So check and make sure both pumps are working. Make sure the hoses aren't kinked. And some of them have really long runs and stuff. And keep the wires for the bilge pumps up high as far as possible in the bilges, because sometimes you will get water in your bilges. You don't want that water to get to the wire connections. And make sure you use heat shrink butt splice connectors, many connections in the bilge. And manual bilge pumps, again, check them. Sometimes you got to put some water in the bilge to get those, but you want to check them, make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. And again, keep your bilges clean and dry. I can't stress that enough. First of all, wet bilges will cause your boat to stink. It essentially becomes a petri dish down in the bilge, and bad things start to grow. Safety equipment. For a race like this, there's lots of stuff that you're required to have on board, and be it EPIRBs, life raft flares. This is the 2020 race instructions, but 14 pages of safety requirements. That's all. And in putting this together, I went back through it, and like, man, that's a lot. Don't wait until a month or two before the race to start getting ready. You should be looking at this stuff now and getting ready, because it takes time to get a boat to comply. If you haven't done an offshore race before, especially taking a production boat and making it compliant.
And one comment on that, Mike talked about this beforehand. There will be a presentation here at EYC in the fall that will go through, in essence, these 14 pages of technical bliss. And we'll look at, what are the hard ones to do? What are the easy ones to do? And we'll have a boat out on the end of the dock that complies with all of the safety requirements. And it'll give you some idea in that specific case, how that boat particularly met all of the requirements.
And that's so important especially to go and see it, because some things like, the requirement for securing the companionway hatch from both the inside and the outside. How do you do that? It's not always intuitive. So that's absolutely a good thing to do. The cockpit lockers. Well, I get on boats that are getting ready to go offshore, and all their safety stuff is at the bottom of the cockpit locker. And other stuff piled on top of it. They're just not a fan. Fire extinguishers. Again, your biggest rational fear when going offshore on a small boat better be fire. It is scarier than crap. You're only required to carry, maybe 3 or whatever. I assume everybody's seen or may have like the Coast Guard, handout on what's required, safety equipment and all that. But you want more than what's the minimum. And this is the standard fire extinguisher. Everybody here probably has those on their boats. So that's just a minimum. That one may be that one's just rated BC actually. And you really want fire extinguishers that are rated A, B, C. It covers all three categories of fires. And bigger is better. Having small little fire, get the next size up.
I was gonna say something that was added last year is they all have to be tagged now, inspected.
Yeah, they have to be tagged and go to the next, and make sure I get it, and people just have them like laying loose in lockers and, if they're in lockers, well, first of all, they should be securely mounted. That's actually a requirement. But if they're in a locker, you need to make sure you have a label on the outside of that locker, fire extinguisher and stuff. There's also, so last year, the Coast Guard never mandated anything other than the fact that you had to have fire extinguishers. But last year they issued a new requirement that says they can't be older than 12 years old. So this one here, and these portable extinguishers are date stamped on the bottom typically. This is an 03, so that one's no good. So look at the bottom, and yeah, you're supposed to, you can self-inspect them and all that and tag them, but the important thing is make sure you have lots of fire extinguishers, bigger fire extinguishers. Go to the next one. On many boats of the size and type, you might do this race in. And some boats will have an automatic fire extinguisher. Back in the day we had halon, but these days, if you buy a new one, it's not halon, it's a clean agent. But if you don't have an automatic fire extinguisher, you should have a fire port on the engine box. Now this one, usually there's a plug. The plug is missing in this picture where that round hole is, but you should be able to fight the fire without having to open the engine compartment. You don't, well, that's that. So go to the next. So you do not use a dry chemical fire extinguisher like all the fire extinguishers you have on your boat. You don't use those to shoot through that fire port. To use those extinguishers, you need to shoot at the base of the fire and all the rest. Well, you're just shooting blindly through a hole. So instead, you want to use a gaseous clean agent extinguisher. 30 years ago, you could buy fairly cheaply halon portable extinguishers. Halon has gone away because it's an ozone depleting substance. But there are other agents out there that you can buy and use. They're not cheap. This is like the cheapest one I can find. It was a list for $272 and retails $168. Some of them go up to like $500. So do some research and see what's out there. But if that's what you're going to rely on, that's what you want to carry, even if it's not a requirement of the race or anybody else. Some people don't know. I mean, the Boat US Foundation for Boating Safety lives right here in Annapolis. They're unfortunately in a nondescript office building behind the Subaru dealership over off Route 2. But they have an EPIRB rental business or function. So very affordable. If you're only doing this race and you really have no other need to have for the boat to have its own EPIRB, you can rent one from them. And that's and the reason I'm putting this slide is a lot of people don't know that's one of the things they offer.
Is it PLBs also?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah.
There are commercial sources to rent them.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, there and life rafts and everything else. But just, I mean, it's cheap through if you're a member of Boat US. It's very cheap. That's right. And I just want to touch real quick on lightning because we live in an area where we get lots of lightning in the summer. And when you're out in the ocean, or even in the middle of the bay, and you're stuck in the middle of an electrical storm, it's kind of scary. And what do you do about that? And there's no requirement. First of all, there's nothing you can do to prevent getting hit by lightning, no matter what kind of gizmos people sell you to put at the top of your mast. They don't work. I investigate insurance claims for a living and have seen plenty of lightning strikes on boats with those things at the top of their mast. If you feel so inclined and want to, what you can do is ground your boat down to your keel bolt or underwater metal Julianne's boat does not have keel bolts. It's an encapsulated ballast keel, but if you do want to do that, you use number 4 wire, which is pretty good size wire, about the size of your pinky, and from the mast and rigging down to keel bolts or whatever underwater metal you have.
Bonding plate. Bonding plate.
Yeah, bonding plates. But the goal is to give it a direct path off the boat. Again, it's not going to put nothing you're going to do to prevent from getting hit by lightning, but it gives the energy a path off the boat. It's still going to fry your electronics or some of your electronics. But the goal is make sure that if you're standing back at the helm, holding onto your metal steering wheel, and you're near your backstay, that the energy doesn't come down your backstay and jump through you to go out through the steering gear.
Any difference in risk at the dock between boats that are left plugged in and boats? That
No, it just has to do with the height of your mast and all. Catamarans are the insurance industry statistics have shown that catamarans are twice as likely to get hit. And the only explanation they can come up with is that they take up twice as much real estate. For doing an offshore race, people have, you may have a handheld GPS or whatever. Talked to plenty of people who'll put all that stuff in a microwave oven or the galley stove, right? Essentially anything metal box like that is a Faraday cage. It will protect those devices. I guess you could wrap them in aluminum foil and all other kinds of stuff. It is always good to have a secondary or tertiary means of navigation, electronic navigation. You get hit. And by the way, just as an aside, on navigation and lightning strikes that's why it's really important when you're doing offshore anything. I don't care if it's a race or cruise. Make sure you're keeping an hourly log in your logbook, your coordinates and everything else. If you get hit and it fries your electronics, you want to know where you are, where you were, and so you have a starting point of where to go. And the reason I mention that is I grew up when going offshore. We didn't have a GPS chart plotter, so yeah, you had to do that. But today on boats I get on, nobody writes anything down, and but it's a good idea.
Does turning your electronics off do anything? Just make you feel like you're doing something?
No, so lightning damages electronics through a whole wide variety of ways. First of all, it's connected by wires, and it's first of all, lightning's 1 million volts or more, and it's easily transmitted through any wire, not just the positive wires, but also the ground wires, antenna cables, wires and stuff. But you also have EMP, electromagnetic pulse, which fries electronics, and then static discharge damage. And so there's really nothing you can do to protect. Some people, like an electrical storm, they'll disconnect their VHF radio, and because it's attached to the antenna at the top of the mast, and that's okay, I guess. Disconnect all the wires, the antenna, and everything. But it's other than that, there's really not much you can do. Again, the goal of lightning protection is to protect the people on boat. Even people sitting in the cabins are like, well, I'm going to go huddle down in the cabin during an electrical storm. Well, if it's a keel step mast or whatever, the energy is still trying to find its way off the boat. And I've had people who've been sitting down in their cabin where it burned all the hair off their legs, jumping from the shroud chain plate down to a keel bolt or whatever. So and it never does the same thing twice. So don't be afraid of it, but definitely be cautious, and also understand that in the approach of a storm, you can have lightning more than 5 miles in front of the storm. It's not, you see it, it's far away, but it can actually reach way out. Clean the boat before your trip. I mean, take everything off if you can. Clean it from front to back, top to bottom. Perform all the major service on the machinery. If you have a frozen turbocharger, you should replace it. And test everything in the manner in which it's intended to be used. And I don't care if it's bilge pump, freshwater pumps, whatever. Clean your fuel and water tanks. And by the way, if you have aluminum water tanks, do not put chlorine bleach in your aluminum water tanks. It will attack your aluminum water tanks. And it's always a good idea to get fresh set of eyes, somebody else on your boat to go through it, and be it a surveyor or whoever. And again, do that well in advance. As we were talking earlier, I get phone calls, like a week before the race saying, "Oh, my insurance company requires an updated survey," and I come out and I find all kinds of problems. And then they're in this big hurry. And just learn how to do basic engine maintenance. Annapolis School of Seamanship offers classes in small diesel engines. Anyway, that's and if you need to find a surveyor, NAMS and SAMS both on the web. Any questions?
Going back to the fire extinguishers, I'm starting to see, it's an old thing, but the old fire grenades, there's some company up there.
Yeah. They're not, the fire grenades, essentially it's a little ball, it's like a softball. And if you have a fire, you just throw it at it. And it makes a bit of a mess, but it's very effective at putting. I had a claim a couple of years ago, a big, almost brand new Sea Ray had a bow thruster catch fire. And that's what the guy did. And it's like, wow, but they're not addressed in through ABYC or National Fire Protection Association as far as boats go. But the more the better. Just understand if you use something like that, what the implications are as far as what kind of mess you're going to be left with and all that.
There was something new. We were at Safety at Sea last weekend, and it's a new product called a condensed dry aerosol. So it's not like a bomb.
Okay.
They're extremely expensive, but it's one of those things where you take it and you throw it.
Okay.
And it just it would suffocate the entire interior of a boat.
Okay, it doesn't leave a mess.
It's not as bad. It's not. It wasn't a.
Yeah.
It's not. It wasn't.
And do be aware that so the way a gaseous fire extinguisher works is be it the old halon or the new clean agent. The gas is reactive with the fire. It's a chemical reaction that puts the fire out. Its intent is not to displace the oxygen, which some of the older systems used to do, the CO2 and stuff like that. But if you're in a small compartment, you don't want to use. If you're in that compartment, you don't want to use one of those extinguishers because you will lack oxygen. Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, thank you very much.
Before we go, real quick, who here is planning on doing the 2024 race? Good to see. Excellent. Follow us obviously on Facebook and all that. Get in touch with us through the website. We'll be having more of these, and I don't know when we're going to have our next happy hour yet, but you'll know about the happy hour. Now we have your emails, so now we can spend the crap out of you. So anyway, thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, can I put my phone right there, everybody?
Yes.
I'll check out, make sure if they're saying 12 on the car, I need to get time.
So it could be a zoo out there. It may not be as bad on this side of the peninsula.
Yeah, no, I agree. Park on the street.
Yes.
Annapolis, but over in Annapolis, yachts. And they're likely to be completely empty. And on a Monday morning, they will not.
Nuts.
And
So we're, we have to just go move my car now.
Yeah, it's probably a good idea, but yeah.
Let me get my,
It's just go right across the street.
how do I, this is Mike's computer, so.
Cool, that'll work.
Eject. Currently in use. Oh, let me shut it down.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do the right thing and inject it.
Actually, I'm gonna see Debbie this afternoon.
Are you really?
Yeah, we're,
Over at her new place?
no, going out to visit some friends. I don't know if you know them, Chris and Whiskey. They moved a while ago, but we're mutually good friends and they live out in Frederick, so.
Oh, cool. I wonder if Kip's gonna stay with her again this year since she's across the bridge. Because Kip usually stays with her when he comes in.
Yeah, well, was the safety at sea last weekend?
We went to the one down at Hampton.
Oh, you went to the one in
I went to Hampton. Yeah, the one here's been sold out.
Really? Wow.
Been sold out.
And did you jump in a pool?
Did, yes. Jumped in the pool.
Sold out, really? Oh, it's the one for the school.
For the ISAF, yeah, for
Yeah,
the world.
Right.
Yeah, it's,
But you don't have, we don't require it.
no, but if I'm gonna get recertified, I could do a recertification. They changed something this year. So if I do the modules 11 through 15 online and did the hands-on,
Right.
I get recertified for another 5 years. I
Yeah,
don't have to do the whole thing.
more than having the climbing great life.
So anyway, so I found a couple of spots open down at Hampton, so I went
Yeah.
down to that show, and that's when I ran into Matt down there.
Yeah, in fact, I think Kip is staying with Debbie.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah.
That's one thing I love, when his comms section is just like the best in
Have
the
you
world.
been seeing a lot more lithium installs?
Well, so I didn't, I mean, just that whole presentation. I could talk for an hour on any one minor topic.
Yeah, lithium. I heard they were minimizing how much they would actually insure you. Something just increased to 300,000 was.
My insurance, when I was shopping for insurance last year, a common question was, what are your batteries?
Yeah, it depends on the insurance company, and there's a discussion, argument going on within the.
Let's get it open.
Service industry.
I hit it wrong when I tried to get this opened up.
A surveyor up out of Marblehead, Massachusetts, is he really, they're, I don't know if you know, Professional Boat Builder magazine. The last page is called A Parting Shot. And it's kind of like an opinion page.
Shut
And he
up,
wrote
they
this
do.
really scathing thing on why should the